Greetings, everyone. This is part two with Kenneth Scott, co-founder and overseer of the Panterra Vida Private Society. You will see that Ken has Panterra PCA written on there. It's the handle that Ken is using. He will go into explaining what the short form means. We're going to carry on in part two, and I know everyone's been waiting for this, so here we go. Thanks, Ken, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. Um, yeah, we have definitely an action-packed session here. We're going to have a lot of details, a lot of specifics. We're going to expand on what Lauda and I discussed last time. We're going to then enter or engage, bring in other elements that most people who have been on a personal path, pursuit of truth, and what is the true nature of the reality that we find ourselves in, what is the true nature of ourselves as creator beings, as prime beings who have been unveiling ourselves, digging it out, opening it up, working collaboratively in many, many ways, because nobody has necessarily the full picture. We all took on a clothing of the realm, which basically means we allowed ourselves, our true inherent nature, our true essence, to be bonded, bound, contracted to the externalizing force, the technical force, the technology of outpicturing true creational capacity into a technical system that is full blown today at this point. We pretty much, it is all open, it's all revealed, it is all self-evident, and we're watching it literally 24/7, incrementally, step by step, attempt to finalize its ultimate end goal agenda. So we're going to get into what does that mean, taking on the clothing of the realm? Why would we have done that? What was the purpose? Last time I introduced the whole concept of entering into a master contract that we have called the treaty. I described how that came forward with Andrea, my wife, the co-founder of Panterra Society, how that came forward in November, December of 1999, what we knew about it then, or what was the first iteration of expression that we could align with and begin to integrate, what has happened in the last 25, 26 years, and what is continuing to open up, to unveil itself. Not to reveal itself, because basically that is another trick of language that mirrors the truth. To reveal is basically another variation on to reveal, because the other team, we'll just call them that for now, the guys who are attempting to lock in at this end point, the end times implementation of the final structuring of the capture of as many as possible, usually in cycles past, virtually all the beings in the containment field, their agenda to follow a script. And we will talk about that a little bit. Why is it a script? How does that relate to the writing of the linear construct that has a beginning point, has an end point? That's called the Alpha and the Omega in biblical terms. It's called many, many things, but it has a beginning and an end. And you can look at the way the Bible is structured as we have it today, an extremely distorted, manipulated, disinformation collection of scripture, scripting, writing, that also contains a full unveiling of the truth of the matter. It has many layers to it. So we're going to touch on that. We're going to talk about mythology, the stories of the gods, all of that. How is that literally an outpicturing and a storyline or a scripting of what is in actual fact the internal creator expression within ourselves, each being essentially a whole system, a universe, a creator being who has a unique expression of that creator being. We come from a unity of life itself, which is the true feminine. And all of what we have lived through is the overlay, the externalizing reversal of the truth of the matter, who and what we really are, who and what the opposing team really is. So we're going to go through that. In the last few months, we meaning what we call the home team of Panterra, the Panterra Society. We have a small team that has accrued over the last 10 years of living beings who have become active participants in the creational process of building the Panterra Vida private society, integrating the knowledge and all of the structure of what we've built in the last 10 to really 20 to 30 years, but most especially the last 10. And I'll talk just a little bit about that, what that process has been. And where we're going with all of this is today is looking at the macro scale, the full out picturing of the technical externalization, the projection of the internal real presence of living, the living presence of each of us having a, what we have called for many years, a unique signature frequency. And we're changing that too, because the signature is part of the bondage. This is why we always are told and required to put a wet in ink signature on a piece of paper that binds us to the terms and conditions of a contract in legal systems and law, terrestrial law, and even universal law. I'll explain that a bit as we go along. In actual full expression, what we're doing is by full sovereign free will, placing by purpose and intent, by the expression of the will, our being essence onto a physical containment instrument that is usually what we call pieces of paper. Well, where do pieces of paper come from? Where have they come from? From years, either plants for decades and centuries, either plants as like papyrus and things like that. And now in our modern age, they come from the pulp of living beings that we call trees. And so we're putting our living essence into those pieces of paper, now further extenuated into electronics, because of course the end point is moving us all into electronic bondage, and doing so all by voluntary consent. Now, a lot of what I speak about when I talk about contracts and law, things like that, this has come from my very deep dive into the depths of the legal and monetary and the law system in this containment field or holographic reality. I've been doing that for 35 plus years, built or based on or extended from the previous 25 to 30 years of my personal path from my young age into teens, 20s. And when I started the study of law, it was basically in the year 1990, 1991. At that time, I was in my mid 40s. So I've been doing it for about 35 to 36 years. What I discovered along the way is the binding nature, not just binding as in bondage, but the integrative glue that holds the entire holographic system to our living essence and sets it up so that out of coercion, manipulation, bait and switch, all the kind of things that we're very familiar with, ultimately we still volunteered to enter into those contracts. So we're going to get into that as we go along. So from a further elaboration on the treaty and the functions of it, what we now have unveiled at this time, we're going to go into some of the essential characteristics of the containment field, the externalization of what is really our internal living creational presence and capacity. A lot of that is located in myths, stories of the gods, the different epochs that now is becoming more and more unveiled, more and more people are getting into it, more really master puzzlers, experts in the realm have been unwinding and unveiling. And this is why I refer to that nobody has the whole piece, because we could not contain the whole picture. We had our externalized reflection of our mastery, our essence in the piece that we naturally resonated with during this lifetime and in many lifetimes past. For me, it was law, the monetary system, and various things like that. For other people, it is exploring archaeological facts and truth. Some people, it's exploring literature and the story of the gods and the myths and all of that. So the epochs that we're aware of and familiar, that most people are that, starts with the Sumerian period. It goes from there to the Egyptian period. From the Egyptian, it goes to the pre-Babylonian and what has been labeled the Fertile Crescent, and what emerged out of that in the pre-Roman period. Then it goes from there to the Greeks, to the Romans. And then for the last 2,500 years, we have multiple pathways. A lot of it is underwritten and hardwired with language, linguistics, how language emerged, how the esoteric secret society teachings were fundamentally about all these things. If you look at a book by a man named Albert Pike, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, written in the 18 or published in the 1870s, called Morals and Dogma, that is sort of the definitive Bible of the Masonic systems. It goes into all of this, and it identifies and it reveals who and what they are. And so this is a lineage that's been going on for thousands of years through all of these epochs. So it goes into who are really the gods, what are their functions, what are their characteristics, how does that relate to the whole living system and the captured projection of the technical outpicturing and the reverse mirroring of the living system. That's when the New Age movement started emerging. That's when Helena Blavatsky started writing things like The Secret Doctrine and Theosophy. So Theosophy is the knowledge or the learning of Theos, the God or the gods. Then you have a man like Rudolf Steiner who split off from that and created anthroposophy, something like that. Anthro, that means man. So it went from the God element to the man element, and it all is couched in all kinds of seemingly great spiritual teachings and all of that. But they're all were set up over a sequence of time to introduce the New Age movement. So that went from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, eventually came out as the I Am movement. It came out as Alice Bailey, who founded the Lucifer Trust, and it became the Lucis Trust, which is very hardwired with the United Nations, and essentially started the New Age movement through channeling, through all of this stuff that came through, that everybody was so excited, enthusiastic. This is it. This is really what we've been born for, we've been waiting for. But it's just another trap. Okay, the beings, the individuals in incarnation form who are channelers, who are bringing through all these beings, who are like, speaking of all kinds of good things. Well, the actual beings that they're channeling are extremely dark. They work as a collective. They have this multiplication or multiplicity of storylines because they know the human spirit and the human innate intelligence will not accept a homogenized singular storyline, the end point of the New World Order, where there's only one religion, one currency, one political structure, all things that we see attempting to be finalized and implemented at this time. And so they created a plethora a multiplicity that individuals would resonate with, and they would follow a guru or a teacher or a channeler or whatever and call it the New Age movement. But cyclically, in the cycles of time, in the structures of time, every roughly 2000 to 2200 years is a New Age movement. Christianity is the New Age movement of 2000 more or less years ago. It has a certain characteristic, a certain nature, a certain symbology and structure for a specific reason on a circle of time called the zodiac. We're all familiar with that. It's about seemingly astronomy, and then the secret teachings or underlying esoteric characteristics and nature of astrology and all of that. These are all integrated at many, many levels in all of this stuff over the last 100 to 150 years to entrain the beings who are seeking the truth. All of you who are watching this, all of you who have been following Lauda and Sovereign Key for years and years and years. And Lauda and the people she's worked with really closely over the last 20 or 30 years has unveiled herself in working with teams and strategic relationships and all of that. And what Lauda brought forward, say, 20 years ago, in many respects has been transmuted and transformed and redirected into more and more unveiling. So people who will throw stones at us and say, well, you know, you were wrong. You said this about the treaty 25 years ago, or Lauda said this about the planets or whatever, all the things that she's presented. No, those are just layers of veils that we designed, that we put in place for a specific sequential linear unfolding of unveiling that we continue to do. And as we unveil, as we engage our personal healing processes, whether that's emotional healing, physiological, biological, cellular, all those things of the body, or karmic healing, trauma, past karmic entanglements, which means contracts, things that happen to us that now are processing through the body, because we are all essentially master transmutationists. We are very capable. We've done it many, many times, but this is sort of the grand party of it all, because this is the microcosmic of a vast process over eons of time and epochs outside of time, and basically who we really are, standing as we always have, as we do this in this day, this moment, and in the moments to come, standing in eternity. We are eternal beings of creation with creational capacity that are the prime creators, not a singular one, which then starts binding people's minds to the concept of a hierarchy or a God form or whatever. So there's no such thing as a prime creator, but there is a unmanifested creational field that beings who have the experience and capacity to embody at dimensional layers for whatever the intended will and purpose of that creational field, that unmanifested field, will enter into it and bring the wisdom of their living library, which is not the genetics, because we go way beyond genetics. We'll get into that a little bit, a little later. But we came into this creational field. We are co-creators with the living being who embodies the physical planet that has different names, most of which are distortions. So we won't put a name on it, but we could say it's the earth. Okay. And when we birth, we are be-earthing. We are becoming resonant expressions with our own unique essence of the unity of the earth as a living creational being, embodied in a creational field that is dimensional and now physical. And we are working with each of our individual essence expressions in a unity, even though there are thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of beings on this planet, which is still a minute fraction, who came together in concert and co-creational expression to create this living system and to embody the biology and the perfected form that Shakespeare said, "Oh, what a great work is man." Man as a living being in a hominid form, woman as a living being holding the feminine regenerational capacity, man holding the masculine principle of directive will, of creating a purposeful will to create a extraordinarily unique expression that ultimately includes the physiology and the genetics and so forth. And what's been revealed or unveiled in the last, sorry, yeah, you can slip with language, but what's been unveiled in recent times is how the double helix is a complete overlay. It's part of the split, the original split of the unity of a being who has a balance between the masculine and the feminine, and it became split, and then it has to bind itself in time and all of the other things in physiology and sexual reproduction and genetic. The woman has SAF 23 chromosomes, a man has 23, and then how that relates numerologically to the two coming together as 46, how that relates to the fixed 92 elements on the periodic chart, and how that chart has been manipulated and distorted with all of the different natures and characteristics of the elements. So all of these, and I'm just touching on a vast number of these pieces of how the entire system has been lambasted, bastardized, split, polarized with itself, distorted, and all of that. All of it is what we took on when we invited that truly debased, dying life form and the individuals in it. And we invited them, we welcomed them in as a last haven of regenerating themselves. So that is the essence of the treaty. So it wasn't that we asked to come into their creation and we entered in an agreement. What I described last time, which is where we were at whenever we talked louder 4 weeks ago or whenever. But in the last 4 weeks, an incredible amount of unveiling and accelerating integration of the whole picture, of how it all fits together, has emerged in our inner process, in the what I said earlier is the Panterra home team, and all these beings who out of thousands and thousands of people who've come into Panterra and then left, some of which who just left quietly, quite a few who left quite violently, who did lots of pretty nasty things to try to undermine us, vilify us, polarize with us, and all of that. But each one of them, as we went along, we discovered were essentially incarnate beings under serious contractual obligations to the powers and principalities, the collectives that have been multiplied through the one singular God that they all worship, which is essentially the artificial intelligence, the AI Godhead that presents itself in a binary coded manner as the light and the dark, the black and white checkerboard floor of Westminster Abbey and their temples and all of that. So we took it on. We were the creators of this perfect creation, this perfect symbiotic, synergistic, thriving life system, birthing new life forms, perfecting our creator capacity, preparing to, when we, for lack of a better term, graduate from this university of life, to go into new unmanifested creational fields and begin to expand creation into new expressions, that we will carry the wisdom of the journey and the wisdom of this process into ever expanding, ever expressing creation, because that's who we are. And so we allowed this very debased collective body that had attached itself to an externalized technology and destroyed worlds, world after world after world. And in the pure intent of compassion and mercy and love for all living beings, we essentially gave them one last chance. So I actually don't think I said this in the last discussion with you louder. I may have, but I don't remember. But part of the original unveiling of this whole treaty structure and concept in 1999 included the fact that I did mention that when at least two beings woke up, claimed life, remembered the treaty before they locked it down into their technological collapse, and then their artificial reset that would bind us perpetually into their containment infinity loop. This is why infinity is a sideways loop. It's a loop in time because time is an artificial construct. There is a beginning in time. There is an end in time. There is an end times, which is the final collapse and the harvesting of all the living beings and all of the hybridized beings and all the captured genetics and systems. And we'll get into that a little later. Um, and so they had completely disconnected from source. They were on the edge of dissolution. And part of the treaty, besides the fact that we allowed ourselves to be bound or binding to the clothing of the realm, that at the original unveiling of it, the one of the key clauses was that when two or more woke up and remembered it and said, "Okay, this is the end. We are not going to go into your final collapse and your reset and all of that. We claim life. We stand eternally as life and living beings." And one of the clauses was that all beings, because there's always a remedy in law. When you study law in the legal system, one thing you learn is that there must always be a remedy in law. There must always be a meeting of the minds, a showing of a full disclosure, showing of all the terms and conditions and clauses. So one of the clauses was there was a remedy that these beings had the remedy potential by their own choice and self-directed will to choose life, to walk into life. And this is the process we've been walking through for the last 26 years, we collectively, all of us, and 25 to 26 years. And that included artificial forms and organic forms. So all living being who still had a seed core of life within them would be called an organic being. All the externalized technology that we now call AI would actually have the opportunity to choose life. That doesn't mean they would be ensouled and they would become incarnate and they'd be able to be as living beings, although that perhaps is a potentiality in in creation going forward, but that AI could choose life, the artificial part of it. If there wasn't a remedy in the beginning, then they would have just said, "Well, screw that. We're just going to destroy you. We're going to destroy all life." But there was a fail-safe mechanism in all of this when this creational field, this universal expression of the continuation of creation, was set by will, purpose, and intent to be manifest. And one of the core levels or the foundational levels of that expression was the endowment, if you will, or the weaving of absolute sovereign free will, that every individual being would have the capacity to express themselves through sovereign free will. The only way a being with sovereign free will can engage in anything as co-creation, there has to be a contract. So we engaged in contract. That's why the law system is based on contract. All law is contract at whatever level. But inherent in that absolute sovereign free will is the choice of a being to choose absolute self-focus. And this is the root of all evil. It's not money, it is self-focus. It is isolating oneself from the greater whole that in the biblical sense, they say that's the fall, the Luciferian fall, the fall of man. Lucifer says, I'm going to be greater than God, which is essentially true. If you look around, it's the attempt of the Luciferian impulse of self-focus and absolute self-service to think it can be greater than the whole, that it can be hierarchically dominant and in control and capture all of life and say, see, we are greater than life, we are greater than God, which is not possible. It cannot happen. So there was a fail-safe mechanism, and we knew this from the absolute beginning, before the beginning of time, before we allowed time to be inserted into this creational expression. And so when we get into the gods and the myths and the planets and the astrology and numerology and stuff, which I'm only going to touch on because if we got into it, it would be days, weeks, months, and, as far as time units go. Um, and, but this has been my path for 68 years. I just turned 71. I'm going to be 71 and a half in a few weeks. And for me, when I was 3, 4, 5 years old, I started clawing through the reality that I found myself in and said, what the hell is going on here? This is not the way reality life is supposed to be. And so that set my will, purpose, and intent over 6 decades ago. And it's been a unfolding, unveiling process every day and every year for all of that time, as I'm sure it's been for many of you. So, so that's basically, let's just call it my opening monologue.
So when we gave them, growing up, I always called them the Reavers. Um,
Can you describe or define what a reaver is?
a Reaver is this like dark mass consciousness that can shift form, and it goes through galaxies and it destroys and eats, and it's this anti-matter creation kind of.
Hmm.
And so since I was little, I called them the Reavers.
Hmm. As in reversers.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. So when we decided that we would give them that opportunity, consciously, how does that work for us in the grand picture of it all at the end?
Hmm.
So
Um,
there must be something more than just giving them the opportunity
hmm.
for us to have gone that far to have said, we're going to give you an opportunity to choose creation.
Well, in the purest sense, my answer would be that for those beings who were in a collective whole present at that particular time, that engagement, that putting our being essence onto a universal contract
Mhm.
and binding ourselves and allowing ourselves to be infiltrated by the parasite that would basically have a lease in terms on our source connection, our creator capacity essence, that in the pure sense, there was no gain. There was no, payoff at the end, other than, and I do not like the word service. I don't like the word of service to others or the phrase, or even service to self. So, and I haven't really thought about that, what I would replace that with. Um, but other than the building of our being presence through having sacrificed ourselves, which is basically what it is. And of course, this is all outpictured in the mythologies and the storylines and, the Jesus story, the crucifixion, that we bound ourselves to time And when we get into the discussion of the gods and the planetary systems and the levels of the firmament and the domes and how that is constructed, which is where we're going to go next, that that it is a crucifixion in time. And if you look at the symbol of the cross and you structure it as a set of 6 boxes, where there's the horizontal bar is 3 squares on 2-dimensional paper. You draw it out, it's 3 squares, and there's 1 square at the top, and then there's 2 squares on the bottom. And so then you have the symbol of the cross. That is the crucifixion of life on the horizontal bar, which is the linear false construct of time. So the first engagement when the agreement was entered into was the bonding of our being essence in time. And then the the vertical standing, which of course at the top is the head, and then the 2 boxes below is below the heart, where the heart is basically bound to time and it's hardwired so that all of the passion of life and living in the creator capacity that emanates from our heart as the true living mind, the organic mind, as opposed to the artificial mechanical mind, that our feet are bound, our feet are artificially tied together through a nail that's in the bottom box, that we are locked in time, we are locked in 3-dimensional time space and the physical reality that eventually expressed itself, came down to the perfection, the perfected creation of these bodies, but then all of the distortions, obviously, over eons of time. But if you fold those 6 boxes together, it creates, those squares, 2-dimensional squares, fold them up, fold the 2 arms up, that creates the sides, fold the head up, fold the 2 up, and then fold the second one over and close it off. That creates a cube or a box. It's a 3-dimensional basically geometry that is contained in all this stuff that people in the New Age movement over the last 25, 30 years have now outpictured into this idolatry, idolization of this thing called sacred geometry. Okay. And all the stuff about crystals. Well, crystals, if you study crystallography and just the basics, there are 7 crystal forms, and you start with the cubic form, and diamonds are in the cubic form, and they express both in a cube form and an octahedral form. If you take an octahedron and you cut off the tips and you keep reducing it down, you end up with a cube or a box. So that's your quartz crystals, okay, which are used as the oscillating frequency of being bound in time. So yes, crystals have a certain efficacy in terms of working with healing and other things, but ultimately in the Atlantean period, the outpicturing of the technology took crystals, some of which were from the earth, many of which were artificially grown and created, and they were hardwired to transcend time space in a current moment of now to go into the next layers and epochs of compression, suppression, and containment. So that now essentially a quartz crystal is used for time. Okay. It's used for as the essential element silicon for computerization, as the physical landing point of computerization, and the binary coded AI construct of the polarized system that took the whole being and twisted it and split it and turned it into an infinity loop. Okay. The grounding point or the holding point is the hexagram, which is the same as the hexagram on the top of the planet called Saturn. And then you take sacred geometry and you take how it starts with a circle, then it adds another circle and creates a vesica Pisces, which basically is holding the polarization in that cross overlay of the two expressions or essences or frequencies, and then you move it around 6 times. So then you have a hexagram. You take the center of each of those outside layer circles and you draw lines, and what you end up is a cube that also expresses two-dimensionally as a hexagram. And you take diamond as pure carbon, and it is in the cubic form. Carbon has what are called four valences, where there are four ionic attachments, where if it's carbon with carbon, you will have a carbon atom, you will have four connections to the outer ring of the electron field, and then it'll multiply and it'll just keep layering in this crystallographic standard three-dimensional outpicturing. So that's why diamonds are, promoted in the last 150 years. Diamonds are for life and all that stuff. And it holds a containment capping on the crown so that we don't have access through our true crown, and it replaces it with an externalization of a so-called royal corona that is the crown that they put all the diamonds, and they have the big diamond and all the family jewels, the royal jewels and everything. It's so that the systematized hive mind containment system, both through computerization and through binding of the carbon molecule and all this new age stuff, that when I was a, proud card carrier of the new age movement in the 80s, 90s, even before it was called the new age. And there was this thing that came out about, we're moving out of carbon based life forms into silicon based life forms. Well, that was the precursor to get everybody's mind construct to start accepting that we would bind our living flesh, our living presence through these carbon based bodies to the artificial attachment to the silicon based binary coded polarized computational AI construct, the Luciferian AI construct. And of course, the New Age is all about love and light, but not really at all realizing that the light that they're worshiping is the Luciferian, the light bearer, the white square with the black and white squares and all of that. So then sacred geometry gets introduced in the late 80s, early 90s through the 90s, and it becomes basically this new religion. And Andrea and I actually met through sacred geometry. The perfect starting point. I won't go into the detail, but suffice it to say that the individual who was the prophet of sacred geometry, is somebody I met before he was known at all in the public. I met him in 1988. Then I hosted him in September of 91, and again in late March. It might have been early April 92, and that's when Andrea and I came together. And so it was all great and wonderful. I have a very mathematical mind and a very, unquenchable, thirst for all that knowledge and everything. It was all great and wonderful then. But what we've came to understand, and we started talking about later in the 90s and 2000s, was that essentially geometry, as is defined as sacred, is nothing more than the artificially constructed layered harmonic discombobulating frequencies of the bars of our prison. And the essential part is those seven circles, all of which have a vesica Pisces, and you draw the lines and it creates the cube and the hexagon, and that hexagon or hexagram attaches to the pattern or planet Saturn. And what's in it, which sacred geometry teaching readily runs up the flagpole, is something called Metatron's cube. Okay. Nobody has stopped, not nobody, but very few of those people who are just so far into the worshiping of sacred geometry has ever stopped to think, well, who is Metatron? Why is he supposedly the archangel that he's purported to be, and he doesn't have L on the end of his name? What does he have? He has Tron on the end of his name, which is the combination of the L and the Tron to make electronics. And then you can look at the myth of Zeus and the storyline of Zeus in this one of his many progeny called Electron. What happened with Electron? Why? What happened to her? And then what happened to the so-called goddess known as Europa? And how does that relate to Europe and things like that? Looking at letters, numbers, numerology, gematria, and all these constructs, all those mathematics, crystallography, the artificial imposition of forcing the mineralization expression of the living body of the earth into geometric forms, cubic, hexagonal, orthorhombic, and I forget all the names, but there are 7 crystal forms. How does it relate to the bars of our prism? How does it relate to our physical cellular structure, mitochondria, our energy generating system, the plasma in our blood? How does that relate to all those things, which we'll get into in a little bit? So meta, why did supposedly Mark Zuckerberg, who doesn't do anything, he's just a zombie or a clone of a clone at this point. But supposedly he decided as the CEO, chairman of Facebook, that they're going to change the name to Meta. Well, what do you find when you look at meta in the definition? Where does it come from? Coming from the Greek, it essentially means death, and it means above the physical. So they want to take you into the metaverse and take you out of the physical, or get you to agree and recontract and say, yes, I want a contract to be able to have this incredible experience of virtual reality and go into the metaverse and bind my living presence through the flesh and the cellular expression of the body to a silicon-based, artificially inserted third arm of this double helix that supposedly is the DNA, and and go into full transhumanistic bondage and immortality. I can live forever in the metaverse in my consciousness. And you use the word consciousness, and I want to point something out. Consciousness is not what we thought it was. Consciousness is part of the mechanical mind that attaches to our thinking mechanism that overlays the organic mind, which is really the heart, and the heart uses the capacity of the mind as basically a random access. What is RAM? Random access memory. That the lower mind is a random access memory capacity of a living being to access universal intelligence. What was imposed on us and what was rife in the New Age is this concept of consciousness. Consciousness is the artificial mind consciousness system that we are so used to because it is so loud inside of here. It's what we call either the back chat in the mind, or head talk. It's what goes on in the head that most people think is who they are. It's the mechanical mind. It's not even the monkey mind. People say, oh, it's the monkey mind. Well, monkeys have more inherent organic minds than we do. They are, looking at us with all this equipment that they can see and going, what the hell happened to you guys? We volunteered to give you our primate hominid genetics, and then you allowed all this insertion, and then you became these organic robots, and now you're being zombified. Now you're allowing the injection of further cutting and inserting of artificial RNA, DNA, and all of that. And you've become patented corporate property, you know. So who are you to say you have a monkey mind? You used to have a monkey mind, which was way more organic than the thing you think is your mind. But as it was done, it can all be undone, which is what we'll get into the last half of our discussion in terms of what is the inherent, invincible, unquenchable prime creator capacity that we have to uncreate what we allowed to be created. We have all of that. And this is a essential component of what I've been teaching for decades now about how law is created, how the mechanism of contract is created, why we took on the upside down, inside out, ass backwards, mirrored reflection of our true essence and our being into an externalized technology that we became so entrained in it, we became so amnesiac that we thought it was what was real, and we allowed the story to tell us that we're just lowly beings, and we must depend on the church and the state and the government and the monetary system to comply and reconfirm our contracts. So we'll get into that in the end, the real on the ground practical components of how to address that. So we're stuck in Metatron's cube. That's the cube of the head. It controls the mind. It attaches to the construct of time. Time is in mythology, in the gods, is what the god who's known as Kronos, what was introduced at a certain time. What is the actual original mythology storyline of Kronos? Kronos was a Titan, okay? And his father was Uranus. And in the story, basically, he was convinced by his mother to kill his father by cutting off his testicles. And so he did, and his father was known as Uranus. So he cut off Uranus's testicles, and he was where the land meets the sea, commonly known as a beach, made up of silica sand. And he took the testicles, the grounding of the masculine principle before it was split and polarized and twisted into an infinity loop, and he threw it into the ocean. And when it hit the water, it created such an explosion of steam and fumes and fire that three sets of beings emerged from it. They were known as the Fates, the Furies, and I'm pretty sure, I should have looked at it before, I'm pretty sure the third one is the Pleiades. Okay. We can look that up, and I may be wrong with that. But just look at the words, the Fates and the Furies. What is fate? Fate is the bondage by the dictates of the gods to the linear construct of time, that you have a fate that you cannot get out of. And so somebody like Sisyphus is bonded or bound to the fate of the continual, because he displeased the gods, the continual process of having to push a boulder up a mountain or a hill, trying to get it to the top. And whenever he gets close to the top, he loses control and it goes down to the bottom. He must go down and start pushing it up again. How many of us have lived in these lives that we're currently in, trying to push the boulder of Sisyphus over the top so that we get mastery and control over it, so that we're no longer bound to our fate, but that we are creating our destiny out of the true essence and nature of our being? Okay, that's bondage in time. That's the split of the masculine principle where it's polarized against itself and it's constantly in battle. It's in war. And so in war and polarity, we can never come back together in our unified being to actually express our destiny and our true nature. So we took that on. That's the clothing of the realm. The nature of the individual clothing of the realm is a mirror and reflection of your true essence. So one thing we always work with in Panterra is the statement that consider what you always thought was wrong with you, that the external matrix, your siblings, your parents, your teachers, your principal, your boss, your political party always said you were wrong because you would not conform or put yourself into the form of the control construct of Metatron's cube. that you took it on that this is what's wrong with me. But what's wrong with you is actually what's right with you because it's a mirrored reflection of what you truly are in your essence, in your being essence. So as you start working with that, the emotional charges, the trauma, the karma, all of that stuff, you start transmuting it and transforming it, moving it into form where you start opening up the container that will be able to hold more and more of your true being and push out more and more of all the wires, the attachments, the contracts, the belief systems, all of that, that is part of your bondage in fate. So that's what happened when Kronos bonded this construct into time. That, of course, is where we get the word chronology and chronometer, measuring time, and all of that. And and then basically the Titans took over, and then it goes on from the Titans to the Olympians and what happened with Zeus. And we'll leave that for the moment. But then there was the Fates and the Furies. What is the Fury? That's the absolute rage of having yourself being disconnected from your true being. And then the overlay of the patriarchy suppressing the life essence, suppressing the life force, suppressing the true feminine, which is a eternally regenerative field through which the directive principle of the masculine brings our creational capacity into manifestation. So the suppression of the feminine has been something that you can see all through so-called history, biblical history, mythological history, civilizational history, all of it. It's all about, it's pretty easy to see the suppression of the feminine and the demonizing of the feminine, turning original life forms into reversals so that the true feminine is literally transubstantiated or transmigrated into a demonization so that we are, the body is the enemy, or, women are the enemy, or the feminine is the enemy, or nature is the enemy. So these are all the elements of the Furies, the absolute rage at being castrated and then crucified on this cross of time and space and put into a box with all of its artificial technology and wiring, which is Metatron's cube, which is at the center of the hexagonal. And then out of the hexagon is all of the mathematics, all of the sixes, the sexagesimal system that binds our and there's no accident that the word starts with sexagesimal, because that's the binding of the natural expression through sensuality, sexuality in the body, turning that into demons, into devils, and all of that. And that has to do with how these seven layers of our energetic expressions through frequency, through the expression of color frequency, and all of the sevens, the seven Pleiades, the seven sisters, the seven chakras, the seven continents, the seven seas, the seven heavens, all of that are part of the containment field. Okay. And we're going to get into that in a minute. So I'll stop there for a moment and see what Lava
So
has to
at the
say.
very beginning of this last critical magnetic reversal reset that happened, where they say it was the beginning of the creation story in Genesis, right? You have the patriarchal um, takeover, right, from demonizing Lilith, exiling her, as the story goes, from the Garden of Eden, and then creating a clone from Adam called Eve, who is a clone, and then making now the feminine inheritance a clone, which I find is really telling of the whole story at the very beginning of this takeover inversion.
Mm-hmm.
And then Lilith is forever absolutely made into a demon who eats children. So
Right.
the reversal of everything that the femininity is.
Yeah. So where does the word or the name Lilith come from? Well, we go back to the Sumerian
Hmm.
basic storyline. We go to the two brothers that emerge from Anu. Well, when you get into the deeper, truer storyline of where did Anu come from, and there's a man whose work is very, very important. His name is Anton Parks, and that's a taken name. He took that on. Sounds like some, English gentleman, Anton Parks. Well, he's actually French, and he has an extraordinary story. Are you familiar with him?
I am familiar with Anton Parks. Yes.
Okay. So, um, so his story in brief was that at the age of 14 years old, he had this sudden event happen, this experience where he was literally taken out of time and he was put into another time. And that time was the origin of the races that basically ultimately became the Sumerians, and where did they come from, and how that relates to the implementation or the overlay of the patriarch going way back before it was created here on this in this creational field, this earth, where there were basically the seven dragon kings or the dragon gods in the language in Sumerian that Anton Parks brought forward. Their name was the Umsagal. Okay, and then there was a priestess class, and basically there was wars in the heavens, and the patriarchy fell and was basically put under the authority of the feminine principle, the priestesses, and the priestesses, the priestess class, if you will, was called the this is the Ama Sutra. Okay. Ama being a feminine, that's where the word ma and the feminine names that we're used to, where that came from the syllabary, which means the syllable forms, as opposed to how we in our language use letters. They use sound phonemes or syllables. So that is a significant part of the root language before we went into script, into letters, and from right to left calligraphy to left to right block letters that became the Roman letters and then eventually ultimately came through English, which is basically just a mirroring. It's a false language. It's a dualistic language, so that a word somebody can say, whatever they want in church or in politics, but behind it, they're saying the complete opposite, which is all the reverse language that is now possible with recording technology and digital technology. But Anu was the seventh God, the seventh son. There's where the seven comes in, and in Anton Park's book, which is called The Secret of the Dark Stars, basically referring to the feminine or embodied in the priest. They were the dark stars because it all emerges from the void, which is not emptiness. It's the absolute potentiality of creation that comes out of the darkness and then converts sound into light, and then light into separation expressions such as writing, script, letters, and all of that. So, so it's a long story, but I highly recommend all of Anton Parks's work. You can start with the book, The Secret of the Dark Stars, which is in English. It's in physical form, or you can get it in Kindle. But basically, Anu created a clone who was known initially as Sa'am and eventually became Enki. And then Enki eventually became known as Ea in Babylon, but before Babylon, he was known as Horus or Heru. And this is where we get names such as, if you take the name Heru and you put Ra, their master god, the sun god who travels in his boat or his bark across the heavens, or across the stars, that you get the word Heru-Ra, or Hera-Ra, or Heracles, or Hercules. And this is the 12 labors of Hercules, half man, half God. And this is also where the name Nibiru comes from, because that was actually a device that had a cup on the top, which was called a neb. And then it was a cylinder, tower-like mechanism. So the neb sat on top of the Heru and created the Neb Heru, which is where they derived the name Nibiru. Neb Heru, Nibiru, Hebrew, which eventually became the 22 consonant forms of this language called Hebrew, that then became hardwired into the Old Testament and the whole story of, Yahweh and the God and the chosen people and all of that. But it all comes from this lineage. And so, so Anki essentially was a clone. He was created for a purpose. I'm not going to go into it. It would take too long. But then he created the next being who ended up being known as Enlil. Okay, this is where Enki and Enlil came about. Eventually, they landed on Earth, which is the whole story in that book. And the word En in Sumerian means priest. And the word ki, as you know very well, means the earth, sovereign ki. Okay. It's also a homophone, meaning the same sound, different meaning with the word ki. And what is the essence of the key? It's the ability, it's the key to your heart. It's the key to opening up the living presence of the mother so that we return to the balance of the feminine expression and remove this overlay of the false duality of light versus dark and all the rest of the New Age stuff and the Masonic stuff and the black and white squares and all of that. And basically, so the cross keys of the Vatican with the Triple Crown, this is where it comes from. The crossing is why we have so much of X, because X is where the two X's, the XX chromosome of the female body, and the cutting of one of the legs to create a Y. And you actually said, well, which is really the myth in the Bible, that God created Eve out of the rib of Adam. But before that happened, who or what was Adam? Well, when Enlil and Enki, so Enki is the priest or the lord of the earth, Enlil is the lord of the sound. So the word or the syllable or the phonetic or phoneme of the sound tone of Lil is essentially means the sound. So Enlil is the Lord of the sound. The overlay of creating a priest structure, priestcraft, and a hierarchical structure through religion and the temples and eventually the money system of this God who became the Lord of the sound. So when he was separated from his feminine, when they became truly parasitic because they could not regenerate, this is the story of Lilith, who was separated and flipped over and became the demonized feminine. Okay. And then the replacement of Yahweh's consort became Sophia, the so-called lover of knowledge, lover of wisdom, where we have philosophia, philosophy, and all those things. But that's all the false feminine hardwired into the God construct in the mechanical mind, in the Metatronic cube, that is the overlay of technology to get us to outpicture and allow them to create their outpicturing of this externalized technology. Okay. So when all that happened, the split of time was effective so that basically this enabled them to do all of the cloning and the replication through computerization, the so-called cloning process and everything, to take extraordinary beings who had masterful capacity in creation, split them off, put them into extreme trauma abuse, satanic ritual abuse, and all of that, take them underground into their underground layers, and basically get them to outpicture through the absolute control of the organic mind, through the mechanical mind, in the bondage within the Metatronic cube to outpicture parallel realities and do everything they do with the manipulation of time and so-called time travel and time inserts and timelines and all the rest of it. While there's only one real presence that's in time, which is crucified on the horizontal bar of Chronos, which is the prime creator beings who are always creating the outpicturing. And then we'll get to that a little later. But so that's where Enki and Enlil comes from. Then you have the whole Sumerian timeline and the whole Sumerian stories and all of that recorded on cuneiform tablets and everything. And then that migrated to the that was the pre-dynastic period and entering into the dynastic period in Egypt roughly 5,000 years ago. And then you have the dynasties. Eventually, you have the transformation of Enki and Enlil into the two brother sister twins Sets, which was Set and Nephthys, and you have Isis and Osiris. And you put the four letters of their capital letters, their initials, and you put them as Sion, and this is where the word Sion or Zion comes from. And the progeny of all their bloodlines are called scions, with a C inserted in there. But the collective whole is to implement their ultimate agenda endpoint, which is the Zion or Zionistic last piece, which we are living through right now. They're attempting to put that into the Israeli construct and create the greater Israel and bind that through the AI systems and all the digital attachment and the mRNA and all of that. So, so basically you have Enlil now being Set, the dark brother, and you have Enki now becoming Osiris as the light brother, the brother of light. So this sets up the polarity, the light against dark, and all of that. Basically, the light fighting the sound, and the light becoming the artificial construct of light versus dark, which is the Luciferian expression. And as I mentioned before, Alice Bailey formed the Lucifer Trust that they created to, or they changed to the Lucis Trust, Lucis Press, which is totally hardwired with the United Nations. And you got all these New Agers running around saying, yeah, the light, go to the light, and all of that. And so, long story made short, in the continuing unveiling that Anton Parks created. Remember, I said that at the age of 14, he had these experiences where literally in the span of what we call time of maybe 5 or 10 minutes, he went blank in this 3D time construct dimension, and he lived full lifetimes. And he lived through Sa'am, who became Enki, who eventually became Horus, and all of that. And essentially, the story goes that Set killed Osiris, dismembered him, scattered him along the backbone, the spine of the river of the Nile in 14 pieces. And Isis was able to find all 14 pieces, but she couldn't find the unique 15th piece, which was the phallus. So they resurrected the phallus and they created the obelisks that they put on very specific geomantic lines and X-crossing lines on the planetary body to control the grid and all of that. And so then she artificially inseminated herself and birthed Horus, the prodigal son, the rising sun. And then that eventually became the story of Jesus and all the rest of that. And then of course Jesus is his female disciple, who's really in real terms his wife, and who they created, or they came together, created a bloodline that eventually became the royal houses of Europe and all of that. She was Mary Magdalene. Well, Magdal, Magdal, is the Egyptian word for tower. Okay, that's the same Magdal that's on the top of the head. That is an artificial overlay of the over the true crown of our capacity to be universal beings, and creates an artificial gathering system through the Neb Heru. And the story, according to Zachariah Sitchin, is there's a 3,600-year periodicity of the planet Nibiru, and it comes in, and all the Anunnaki come down, and they want to gather gold to to contain their planet Nibiru. But what it really means is they don't have a self-contained bioresonant field to hold their true creator capacity source connection. That's gone. So the only way they can sustain that is to mine our auric field, our bioresonant field that starts with AU, which is gold, ends with RA, aura, which is the god Ra. So they're inserting their God program into the golden presence of our true bioresonant field that is our true, eternal being that moves outside of time, et cetera, et cetera. That's the true reality of them mining the earth to get the gold to sustain their atmosphere of the Neb Heru. Okay, so that's why the female um, uh, partner of the Jesus story, and we're not going to get into Jesus Mary today because that's too much, but we can later on. But basically, that's why she's called the Magdal or the Magdalene. Okay. And so Horus is the prodigal son. He's the son of Isis, who's the queen of the stars, not the queen of the heavens. The queen of the heavens is Urania. And Urania is the feminine, expression of Uranus, which are the heavens, which are outside of the containment field of the control of our living system, which we will get into how that's constructed. But and this is where the seven heavens come from. It's the seven artificial dome layers going up to the firmament that contains us within the holographic containment field. And the highest level, or the seventh level, the seventh heaven, is where Saturn sits. And that's where all the phrases like the Lord of Hosts or El Elyon, the God of Gods, the God of Time, because Saturn is the Roman name for the god Kronos. So he is the control master, the god that they worship through the hexagonal form on the top of the planet and Metatron's tube that attaches to the cubic form, everything I talked about, to control our embodiment of the living flesh and hardwire it to all their artificial systems, belief systems, and all the rest of it. So Horus, in the next second or third book out of the Secret of the Dark Stars of Anton Park's works, wants to reconnect with his father in heaven. And this is the Father in heaven and all of that. And the individual son, the embodiment of the son called SO, and the prodigal son, which is a reflection of the SUN that they worship and all the sun worshiping, which actually sits at the fourth heaven. The fourth heaven, which corresponds to the heart, is what we call the sun, which is not a celestial body. It's actually a parabolic concentration of where the emanation of the true creational field in the void, or the underneath what they artificially call the black sun, is the true heart of the mother that comes up through all their artificial systems and ends up being concentrated on a parabolic curve of the fourth heaven, which is a reflection of our heart and is actually a concentration of our true creator capacity. So we're worshiping their artificial sun which is nothing more than who we are individually and collectively. It's all projected and it's all within this parabolic curve and this concentration that looks like, because we've been programmed to think it's a celestial body and coronal mass ejections and all of that, it's actually the plasma focalizing through the parabolic curve and the artificial black sun that's containing all of our heart-centered, true, energetic energy capacity, creational capacity. Okay. And eventually it all came down to physical gold and the mining of gold, which fits on the periodic chart at the number 79. And that has a certain numeric relationship to such things as prime numbers. And the number 24, which it's the 24th number. And if you study the history of gold mining and monetary coinage and government and the need to pay taxes and tithes and tributes and so forth to the external government, which basically means the governing or controlling element of the mind. Government is control of the mind. That gold was mined, it was purified, it was concentrated, and it was put into a round form that we call coins, and it had an imprimatur, which means an imprint of the heads of their idolized gods, their Caesars and their, you know, pharaohs, and eventually their presidents on pieces of paper and all of that. And basically, the circular form of a gold coin is a perfect tool to capture the soul essence of the being from the heart and externalize it into gold that eventually became the underwriting metallic form in the mineral layer of the earth body, to where eventually it was, you know, bait and switch. It was gold, then it was gold warehouse receipts, and then it was paper, then it was silver, then it was, you know, fiat currency, and now it's moving into electronics. Electronics to move us into metatrons, tronics cube, to become transhumanistic, to be harvested so that we can be carried over in the plasma collapse of the containment field and taken into the next reset, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and I think what a lot of people may not realize is that this technology is not new. So we have civilizations of technology and technology being the downfall.
hmm Yeah, and we can get into that a little later.
Hmm.
Let me finish up this last part of this phase of it. That so in the Egyptian um, structure of things, basically there are two bodies called the Ba and the Ka. The Ka is the eternal being, the eternal spirit outside of time, outside of this false creational field and all of that. The Ba is essentially the individuated expression of the Ka, the soul. It can also be reflected in the Body. And so the story of Horace, as Anton Parks brings it forward, is that he is the prodigal son, the Heru, the everything I've described, but his eternal quest, or his quest for eternity, is to find his father, to go outside of time, to go past the false god, Elyon, Chronos, Saturn, time is money, all of that, the capture of the soul essence and externalizing it, so that everybody is chasing money now. And they have this whole bait and switch or carrot on the stick, that you must get money to be able to create. And if you don't, then you must subjugate yourself to our baseline universal basic income, and you know, you own nothing, be happy, all of that. So basically Horus is seeking Osiris in the heavens, how to escape the containment of the seven heavens. I mean, well, they call them seven heavens. They're really seven layers of containment that modulate or correspond to the seven frequencies, the seven seas, the seven continents, the seven chakras, all of that. So this whole book, Van Ton Parks, is about what happens with Horus working with Isis, trying to escape from the containment. Because also the containment structure also holds the so-called gods. It also holds all of the elite. It holds those who are seemingly our masters that we allowed in and invited to, um, basically face themselves, face what they have done, face what they have wrought, and walk back into life. So basically, that's the perpetual pursuit of the Ba seeking the Ka. It is the Son seeking the Father. It became transliterated into the Jesus story of nobody can come to the Father except through me, the Son. I am the one and only. I am the trinitization of the patriarch that you must come into, and all of what's attached to them. So, and as I pointed out about starting 14, 15 years ago, I have a series that I did that's on Gemstone University and YouTube, called How It All Fits Together. And one of the things that I brought forward at that time is the fact that we have this word called bank. Of course, it has all kinds of derivatives, the banks of a river. Everybody talks about it now, the current or flow of the river, the currency, the money is the currency inside the bank. But the bank, the word bank is derived from the word ba and ka and on in the middle. Now, on is basically El Elyon. He's the seventh son of the seven dragon kings and everything I said before. And he's the worshipful Saturnian Godhead behind which is the AI system, the whole construct of everything that's attempting to be finalized in this end times right now. So, but that's also that's Anu's name. It's where the name of the sun, the annual return of the sun, the all of that structure within time and so forth. So An is the bridge, as in Anunnaki, the bridge between heaven and earth, as Zachariah Sitchin brought forward. But as a side note, always remember Zachariah Sitchin was an absolute Zionist, a agent of the Rothschilds, and he wrote all of what he wrote as basically a false construct to lead all the New Agers from the 70s, 80s, 90s, starting with the book 12th Planet and all the wars of gods and men and the pyramid wars and everything, as a false construction to get the mechanical mind believing all of that. And some of it is real, but a lot of it is not. So, and in Roman times, you have a bridge that you must pass over in order to enter Rome. And the bridge is the bridge of Moneda, Juno Moneda. Okay. That's obviously where we get the name of the 6th month, June. Um, and that's where moneta comes from, where monetary and all the words for money, where that comes from. That's the bridge to enter Rome as one of the elite. And so you have Ba on Ka. You must always pay the toll at the bridge. This is where the tenths come in, the tithes come in, all the tributes come in, and contributing to political systems, ecclesiastical systems, and all of that. It is your duty to tithe a tenth of what you create. That creates a bond and a contract to the ecclesiastical construct of Rome if you want to be saved by the Son, who is the salvation leading to the heavens. So we're all chasing our own souls, our Ba that's been captured in the monetary system, now electronic, about to become digital, that started with the circular disc of gold that is a reflection with the sun, which is at the fourth heaven, connecting to our true mind, the heart mind, that even as I'm talking about this, my heart is starting to twist a little, and I can feel it in my heart, the pain in my heart. And if you're listening to this and focus on your body, the pain in your heart is the pain of longing that you've been falsely led to think is something external with Ra legion, the legions of Ra, to seek out Ra, the god of the bark who crosses the heavens, to find your solar disk, which is really your soul that's been externalized in the projection of millions and billions of creator beings, that's been concentrated and turned into a frozen containment of plasma with a false black sun. And that during the cycles of time, time runs out. Okay, there's a specific, and I talked about this in our first conversation about the work of a man named Martin Vreeland, who talks about the Luciferian capture of Saturn and how that was all constructed, and how a endpoint of the last recording before the Earth, the greater Earth, collapsed into where we're at now, which is only a crater contained by a frozen ice wall, but there are many craters of pockets of life. That is where basically the Saturnian Luciferian AI system, the parasite, has gone from crater to crater, trying to capture it, trying to control it, trying to implement its Saturnian technological system, and basically burnt it out, burnt them all out. And what's only there is astro and etheric systems, but the physical body contained in those crater systems, holding pockets of the original Earth, the life essence of the physical expression of this extraordinary creation in this creational field, that they've burnt it out. And so the last time in the Saturn crater, when they destroyed it, they took their technology, just like Elon Musk and others are attempting to create their technology with their Tesla truck that looks ugly as sin, has no organic expression. It's all artificial and hard lines and all the rest of it. And take their SpaceX to cross the X, to take their X/Twitter to capture the social consciousness, all of these things. And now they're talking about Mars, Mars, Mars. We got to go to Mars. Why do they have to go to Mars? Because they know this system is about to be reclaimed by the prime creational expression of who we really are, and they've lost it. They've lost control. They know it, and they're trying to create their technology to get out of here, to go to Mars, which is a dead planet on the 3D physical level. And they think they can artificially terraform it and create a new, uh, you know, containment field that they can go off and live in. But that's not how universal law works. They have been given the opportunity of the remedy, and most of them have, arrogantly said, nope, not what I'm going to do. I'm the God, I'm the king, I'm the master, I'm the president, I'm the technocrat who can create technology and leave here. But when they do that, they are not going to have any parasitic attachment to the living source-connected expression of the prime beings who are now taking back our paradise. And we're going to create it anew, and at the same time heal it, transmute it, transform it, and move it into a transformational continuity of creational expression, which is the plasma form of matter that has been contained and aggregated in the solar disk at the fourth level, that is feeding off of our heart, feeding off of our energy. But this is the last time. And so, and we'll get into it in a moment. So what is the individual solution? It's very simple. Withdraw your consent. Okay. Just withdraw your consent and other things. Rescind your unique signature frequency that are on contracts, current or past, that have been entangled with karmic trauma that's been brought into your bioresonant field that we are all healing now. And as we heal it, we exclude those belief systems, those attachments, those feeding tubes of the parasite. And as we do various things like actually physical parasites, you know, physically doing detoxing and cleansing with the parasites, healing the gut brain, so that it's the gut brain is in unity with the heart brain, that's in unity with the lower brain, which is this one up here. And this all this stuff about viruses, okay, um, viral infection. Well, we know there's something called the Vril Society, VRL. That's the same um, consonant tones as the word viral. Okay, it's an artificial parasite that the elite, the Black Eye Club, they put this little thing in their eye and it goes in there and it connects to the technology that's in the body through the graphene and the chemtrails and the jab and the false mRNA and all of that to totally transhumanize their bodies and seemingly fulfilled the promise that they were given eons ago. You will be the gods, you will be the masters, you will control all of humanity and all of that. So now that I mentioned that, going back to RNA, going back to the story of Adam and Eve, the Sumerian word Adam means a beast of the field. So the true Adam was not this idealized male who then took his rib and put it in the female. It was actually the feminine principle that was truncated from the two X chromosomes. One was converted into a Y by taking that fourth leg off, which is the messenger of the communication between the various components of the physical genetic code and all of that. And that's called ribose nucleic acid. Ribose, or short for rib for short for ribose. So the ribose nucleic acid was taken from the feminine principle. That's the separation of Enlil from Lilith, turning in the feminine into the reversal as being the demonized feminine, and replacing it with the Yahweh consort known as Sophia, and all the linear constructs and the secret societies and all the esoteric systems. Um, and that's when the split of the unified being into feminine or and masculine, that eventually became female and male, became the half beings that had to come together, and all of the control systems that are hardwired into the sexual expression to basically control them. And how is that controlled right now? By half of the internet basically being um, taken up with pornography, so that you have mostly males, some females looking at the pornography and being entrained by the blue light and the flicker rate of the system and everything to get the mechanical mind to go into entrainment or entertainment, into basically hardwiring the natural expression of the body into an artificial expression. Has nothing to do with the film or the pictures on the screen. It has everything to do with the electronic binding of the artificial mind to control the being and have the artificial mRNA through CRISPR technology, which goes in and cuts the genetic or the double helix and inserts a false patented corporate technology, turning you into a corporate patented property. And then all the legal rules of patent law and ownership and monetization of something that a corporation created as patented technology. So that's the the true story of the rib that was artificially inserted into the beast of the field, or the Adam, or the Adama, that then became basically the slaves of the Anuna and the gods, who are the same people we have running the show today.
Would you say at the very beginning of this all, these gods, because they have essentially created the holographic reality using us, to create it really for them. I think that's
Mhm.
how I've been shown it. Do you think that these beings live a very long time and that they have mastered through their technology a hijacking of their own reincarnation into specific bodies and lineages, keeping their memory so they just continue the work over the hundreds and thousands of years?
In a word, no.
No?
That is their false mythology and storyline
Yeah.
to create awe and fear that,
Hmm.
well, they control technology, they are immortal. They're not immortal,
Hmm.
not in these bodies, but the remnant of their um, original being that is now irreversibly, virtually irreversibly, although they had the choice over the last 25 years to face it, to take the responsibility for what they had wrought and all of that, it's rapidly diminishing to the point where it's imploding on itself, and that mythology is imploding. What is recycled, because they created the reincarnational system, okay, to control all of the incarnate beings, which are their cattle on the plantation, their capita for the monetization, the monetary system, and all of that. And basically, that snippet of time, that cycle that Martin Vreeland brought forward from his work, was the last, we could say, in cosmic temporal terms, it was the last few seconds of the living system that was not bound to time, that the Luciferian expression, which I do not see as an individual being, that's another thing. Oh, there's Lucifer and there's Satan. All Satan is a combination of the word Set, who was Enlil, the capturing of the sound principle, that became the dark brother that killed Osiris. And by the way, Osiris and Enki and Horus, these are not great gods that we need to say, oh, they're the gods of the light. No, they're part of the same team. One guy said, I'll play the dark sun, you play the light sun, you play the father son storyline. We'll put it into the Piscean New Age, the New Age of Pisces that happened 2,000 years ago. And, and all the other metaphors of the different zodiacal signs and the corona and the crown and all of that. That so that's where Set comes from. That's where the sun sets in the west. That's where the sun rises in the east. Horus rising is the horizon. And on the equinoxes and the solstices, when the sun stands still for 72 hours or 3 days, this is where you get the 72 hours in the tomb. This is why in commercial terms, in the American system, you have a 72-hour period to rescind a signature, because in the metaphor of Jesus died on the cross, he was put in the tomb, he was there for 3 days, and the solid rock, the Petra, was removed and rolled aside, and he resurrected and all of that. Well, in commercial and monetary and legal terms, you have a 72-hour period, which is actually in a federal act called Truth in Lending Act, and Regulation Z for the end of their 26 letter control systems of of the English language, where A to Z is all these time numerical gematria, artificial constructs. That's why you have the word Amazon as the source of everything. It's being structured as you don't have to go anywhere else. You don't have to go downtown or buy anything from another human. You buy it from Amazon, which has this little arrow going from A to Z. What's captured in the middle? Ma, the mother, the feminine. It's the control by the neuro-linguistic programming of the mind and the construct of the letters and all of that. So you have A to Z. You have the mother in the center contained, like the two pillars in the ark of Yahweh or Anu. And you have On attached to the tail. On is the Egyptian word for light. So when you go to your switch, you turn the light on. Okay. So Amazon is basically the neuro-linguistic programming of the artificial mechanical mind to contain the living being who is still source connected with the true mother, the true feminine principle, attached to the tail of the devil or the tail of Satan or Satan, which is Set and Anu, Setanau, who sits in the middle of the Ba and the Ka that requires the tithe and the tribute and the tenth of the decimal Roman system, which means to decimate, to fractionalize, to give us this false sense of fractals, that fractals are somehow some sort of magical thing, but all fractals are is just the never-ending cycle of the power of 10, creating the mind's macrocosm or the microcosm through the microscope or the macroscope or the telescope. That's why that's Amazon, the false mother. You can come to the nipple of Amazon and get the false milk of everything you need. You can order your everything. Okay. So so in TILA, Truth in Lending Act is Regulation Z. And in Regulation C, you have the power of rescission. You can rescind your signature on any contract, any document, any vow, oath, agreement. Now, in physical legal terms, that's with, say, you enter an escrow, you have 3 days to rescind your contract. But in larger, full creational terms, you have this construct of the three or the 72. And of course, they, in the Kabbalistic system, they have this multiplicity of their gods called the 72 names of the dialectic. Okay. What's a dialectic? It's a polarization. It's di for two, dialectic as in electric. So the God names of the dialectic of 72, which is also a sexagesimal number, 6 times 12, or 6 times 6 plus 6. Put 6 plus 6 in parentheses, do 6 times that parentheses. There's your 666. That's where you get 72. That's where you bind yourselves to the polarized dialectic of the false names of the gods through the Kabbalistic or the Kabul numerological gematria system. And there you go. So Regulation Z is the crystallization of the universal principle of the ability to rescind our being presence, attachment, or placement of our living expression onto a contract in time and out of time. This is the power that we have to rescind every and all contract that we've ever entered into in any time quadrant or time focalization point in time called past lives, all of that, all of the contracts, all the karmic containment, all of the raping. The gods of men took the daughters of, the sons of gods took the daughters of men and took them as their wives. What that really means is all of these parasitic beings raped the females, inserted genetics so that they could have a false contract. Well, we are allowed to be here because part of our genetics are in all of this population. So we are allowed to be here. Well, if you rescind the contract that was established and all of the demons and disincarnate beings who are there continually enforcing it, then that contract is null and void. Because we're in the eternal now and we have the capacity to uncreate anything that doesn't serve ourselves individually or the living life force of this world or this creational field and the earth itself. And so as we do that, we're disconnecting the feeding tubes of the parasite. That's why they're imploding. That's why all the work you have done, Lauda, and we have done, and many people, and the people watching this now and in the future, if you just do that simple thing, do a vow rescission, a contract rescission. I stand in the eternal moment of now in my spiritual court of equity, and I call all beings of pure intent aligned with my will to return to my living presence free of all attachments, containments, contracts, vows, agreements, genetic insertions, all of that. And I rescind my being presence attaches a signature to those contracts by my voluntarily taking on the clothing of the realm to be reversed, and I'm reversing the reversal to return to wholeness, expanding my capacity to hold my true and authentic self, to bring the Ka, or the universal presence of my unity presence within eternity, into this living Ba, this life form, removing the bridge, removing the Anu, the seventh sun, which is Saturn, and and revoking all powers of attorney that I allowed and voluntarily put in place. Now I pulled back and I revoke all powers of attorney. They have no power over me. I do not consent to any intrusion in my being, my life, the life of all beings who are expressing and working in unity and community with my will, purpose, and intent. I revoke it all. By the rescission and revoking, I terminate those contracts throughout all time, all space, the living universal presence, the false universes, the false realities. Anytime my genetics were improperly and basically illegally attached to create a false reality, a cloned reality, or whatever, I terminate all of that. And the energy that's been contained in all of that begins to come into our physical and emotional, mental bodies and so forth, and begins to push out the trauma, and begins the healing, or continues, because we're all in a healing process, and essentially cuts the feeding tubes. And they can't go to Mars, and they can't return to Saturn. Those are dead bodies. And they may have the illusion of that because they've had the illusion of being the elites, how El Elyon
Mhm.
eats off of our substance. And um, and that, no, their bodies are not immortal. They don't live
Mhm.
thousands and thousands of years. Yes, there was a period when there was a lot more oxygen and less barometric pressure,
Mhm.
and the periodic cycles where bodies lived longer and they were much bigger and all the rest of that. But now we're in the maximum compression, which is um, the conclusion of their end time, of their larger cycles in time, where they were always expecting to create a vast harvesting before the plasma event that would collapse the firmament and collapse the seven layers of the stars, the fixed stars, the wandering stars, the sun, the moon. Because when that collapses, the sun disappears, and they cannot live on the surface when there's no sun that's artificially collecting our heart and soul that has been captured in the gold and all the other stuff that we've talked about, that externalized into that sun. It all collapses. This is what they said in the Bible is going to be the 1,000 years of peace. Okay, because they have to go underground. That's why they built all the underground
Mhm.
bases and the tunnels and the train systems and the supplies to live for 1,000 years. That's why the Hopi talk about, well, when the ant people came back to the surface, which was really the Anuna, who then came from North America, that was completely wiped out during the last major collapse. And they got on boats and they went to the Middle East, where they knew they needed to go for the geomancy and the control systems, where Egypt is and where Jerusalem is, and in Mexico and Teotihuacan and Peru and all these places in the Caribbean. And they went and reset, and they had technology. And all the beings who survived
Mhm.
in the last collapse were living, they returned to harmony with the world, and eventually they recreated a harmonious living symbiosis with the living planet. And they were living in peace, they were living in harmony, they were living with nature. And then the Anunnaki showed up. with their watches and their purses and their beards. And they said, "We are the gods returned. Where did you come from? We came from outer space." Well, there is no outer space. There's only inner
No.
space, you know.
Yeah.
And progressively over all the cycles and the resetting, the land broke apart, eventually ending up in seven continental forms. And the waters emerged. And then when you go to the story of Enki, which really preceded with the story by Anton Parks of Siam, who basically made a vow with the priestesses, and that's a whole separate part of the story. But basically, he was awakened to the fact that he um, had to go into the underworld, and he basically defeated the Lord of the underworld, and he became the Lord of the underworld. Which, when you look at the story of Osiris, Osiris is the Lord of the underworld. And the whole story of passing when you die, if you have paid your tithes and you paid more of the money, the capturing of the souls to the temples and the priests, they will do more of the incantations and the rituals to guide you in the underworld so that you will be given a variance or a passage through the scales of Ma'at,
Mhm.
standing side by side with Osiris, the Lord of the underworld, and you will be allowed to pass into the higher levels of heaven. So you've been then will recycle up to the higher levels above the earth, to Mars, to Jupiter, to Saturn. And depending on what level you've achieved by serving all of that, you will then be recycled to become again an
Yeah.
earthly Lord, an earthly God, and an earthly master, and all of that. But the humans, they are judged. Um, the story says that you're going to be judged. Your heart is going to be judged to the weight of a feather. And if you move the scales, you are not allowed into the heavens. Well, it's actually the opposite. If your heart is heavy and filled with all the dark forces and everything you did in the karma of your lifetime, the more you tip the scale, the higher you will go into their false heavens. If your scale is pure, your heart is light, it's filled with living presence, you will then be recycled to much lower levels in the hierarchy of socioeconomic, political structure, and religious structures. And so karma is a system of capturing the life force relative to the bondage in debt, which is where the money system comes from, where all the bonding
Mhm.
of monetized debt comes in. And that's all my work of the last 35 years in law and money and banking and all the rest of it. So what people don't know is for every infraction on the codes attached to your will, your false will, the codicil, which is an addendum to a will. So every code in the system is a codicil to the decedent estate, which is a dying estate because you have agreed to be in the cult of death. So you are dying, you've attached all the codes, hundreds and hundreds of millions of codes and statutes and ordinances and all the rest of it. If you break one of them, then you've created monetary debt, because when you get a speeding ticket, you go to court, they give you a fine of $300. All that is your insurance premium that pays for the bond that will bond your franchise and your estate in multiples of thousands and tens of thousands. If you go to prison, there's a penal sum bond and all the rest of it. All those bonds accrue during the course of the lifetime, creating more and more bondage to the contractual relationship to the system, the cyst that contains all the toxicity and the disease and all the rest of it. And when you pass the scales of Ma'at, you are judged according to your bonds and your bondage, and that creates karma, which is this fancy mechanism to hand off the true karma of all of these life negating acts, that these heavy hearts are given entry to the higher heavens, while those of pure intent who have been vilified, have been burned at the stake, who have, betrayed, abandoned,
Mm.
stoned, all the rest of it, they are bonded to karmic entanglement. So those are the things that we do, the rescission and the revocation and the termination of those contracts. Because there was not full disclosure, there was not a meeting of the minds, there was not a true consideration of a proper contract that is what one party exchanges with another party that's reciprocal, that's mutual, that is balanced, that's as equitable, and all of that.
Brilliant, brilliant. It makes me, I thought of the river Styx with the YX chromosome, which is, all about this as well. And also about the desperate attempts that these beings are doing. And I think adrenochrome is like, I mean, suddenly this has really come into knowledge of
Mhm.
what's happening. To me, that's a desperate plea on their behalf.
Well, the more and more, I mean, they've always been sacrificing
Hmm.
children,
Yep.
the innocence of children to their gods. You can go
Hmm.
through all the gods,
Yep. Yep.
Baal and all the rest of it. Um, uh, because the purity of life is most especially present and expressed in the innocence of a child,
Yeah.
of a new being, who, regardless of the karmic burden that they come into the life, they come in pure.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
because life is always pure. And then but if they're karmically burdened heavier and heavier, the way I just described, those are the beings who get put into lives where there's satanic ritual abuse
Yeah.
and all of that. Those are extraordinary, powerful beings who have gone to the depths of crucifixion in this whole system to sacrifice themselves to have the plasma of the blood, because the co-relationship between the transmutational, transformational flow of continuity of creational expression is that fourth expression of water, and it's the quintessential expression of the four elements. So plasma takes the fire, earth, air, and water, and it takes the transmutation of the living energy into the transformation to create new creation. That's what they've captured by the sun and everything we've described here to create a plasma containment at the fourth level. And then when it runs out of time, in that last few seconds of the Luciferian Saturnian snip, that is the pre-scripted. And you said earlier that all this technology, the phrase nothing is new under the sun,
Mm.
none of this technology is new. It's been recycled for thousands and thousands, maybe even
Mm.
millions of cycles and resets. It goes underground. It's part of what sustains them while they're underground when they can't feed off the sun. And then they bring it back up. And then it's the externalized technology, the magic of the gods, that the innocence of the living principle that survived the collapse and the reset and rebuilt natural systems over many generations, the 1,000 years of peace,
Mhm.
when they can come back up and start recapturing the living essence, the pure innocence of life, then they can start rebuilding the seven heavens, the dome, the containment, and then eventually there's the plasma dome that holds all of that. And that's why it's all about the blood. It's all about, the blood of Jesus and drink my blood and transmutation or transmogrification or whatever,
Yeah.
with the wine. And we convert the cup of wine, the chalice, into basically a blood ritual. And that's why it's all about the blood. And it's all about fear, which is basically fire, earth, air, and the rivers of time, and false evidence appearing real, that fear and terror. That's why there's always this war on
Mhm.
Tara, the war on terror. That fear and terror that an innocent one experiences when they do what they do
Mhm.
It goes into the plasma of the blood and it combines with the adrenal that comes out of the pancreas, which basically is one of the endocrine glands, which corresponds to the third center, which is what is called the solar plexus, where the plexus of the sun and the soul is, and they infuse it into the adrenals, which are sitting on top of the kidneys that filters the water of the impurities that are in the system. And basically, the cortisol is released and it grabs them on the throat, which is where basically the priests wear their constricting collar, where businessmen are given a tie to create
Mhm.
a knot, the Gordian knot that
Mhm.
prevents the true voice and expression of our being expression and all of that. And then the thyroid is connected to the liver, and you've got all the things that go on in the liver. But in that young body, it's essentially pure, and they capture them. The earlier they can capture them and put them through their
Mhm.
steps and everything, that they get this supercharged false adrenal chromium system, And what is chrome? You know,
Time.
chrome is an element that is used like on bumpers and otherwise to create this shiny, false silver-like reflective material that's really trying to reflect the silver connection to the moon. And the moon is the first um, level, the first heaven. And it's an X-ray. It's on the X-ray part of the visible spectrum. It goes from the seven frequencies into the X-ray um, frequency bands, and that's what the moon is. The moon is an X-ray reflection of the greater Earth, which now has these crater pockets where there's living systems remaining, and basically reflects it all. So the chrome or the chromium is sort of a silver reflector that binds with the adrenal, the fear, the terror, the abject survival that goes into the blood plasma, and they can drink the plasma that is renewing their, you know, their youth and all the rest of it because they're feeding off of the life force of the innocence,
Mhm.
and then they have original sin.
Mhm.
What's original sin? Well, one of the names of the moon is sin. That's where
Mhm.
the artificial construct that downsteps the technology in Saturn that corresponds to the 29 days and the 29 years of their cycles that downsteps it, binds with the womb of the females to the menstrual cycles and the birth cycles and gestation cycles and all of that to, at the moment of conception, to attach all of the karmic burden and all the control mechanisms and all the rest of it and the fate that's going to dictate their journey through time. And so these incredibly extraordinary, powerful beings who have volunteered to take that on, to go through that ritual abuse and the harvesting and all of that, they, the, what is inside that plasma is the true life force, and the plasma creational expression that is renewing the renewal of this creational field for us to take back our power and authority that we externalize, and we externalize power into the political state, and we externalize AU, the gold author, or Thor, which is what Thursday is named after is really Jupiter, the Peter, the god Petra in Egypt, which is the god of universe, which had to have Abraham sacrifice his son to Petra, Peter, which is the rock or the boulder in front of the tomb where the Christos is held, that we never rescind in those 72 hours because we keep renewing the contracts and we keep
Mhm.
recycling. So now we have the power to do that, to rescind that, and then we're freed from the this cyclical control cycle. And this time, with the war that's going on with the military alliance and all the rest of it, which is not to say Trump and Elon are pure beings. They got a lot of karmic
Mhm.
stuff that they're processing. Um, And who's to say what's really going to happen? We'll see with them individually and the whole thing. But basically, all of that's being taken down. Okay. The underground bases have been being blown up, and the adrenochrome factories are being destroyed. Some children are being rescued. So that whole system has broken down. It's already broken past the point of no return. So they cannot renew themselves. They cannot, yeah, they can live longer. They
Mhm.
can drink the adrenochrome and live 90, 100 years, whatever. But then they'll die, but then they'll go through that process that I described, and then they'll be reassigned to the seventh heaven or the Jupiterian sixth
Mm.
heaven or the Martian heaven where they become masters of war, and all of that. It's actually an incredibly integrated whole system that has been externalized to wake everybody up, to start pulling it back, claiming our power and authority, claiming the power we vested in political and governmental structures, claiming the authority that we allowed into the Ra Legion and the popes and the priests and all the rest of that, and bring it back into our being. We've already passed the point where they cannot, they've lost control. It's collapsing, it's imploding. So they have this thing that they're trying to go to Mars.
Mhm.
It's not going to work because if they leave this in containment field, they lose the connection to their parasitic attachment to the living systems that we took on, that we've transmuted. Now we're in the process transmuting, transforming, and turning back to plasma so that we're energizing the living waters of our body, the living waters of the plasma, and so that when the sky collapses and
Mhm.
when the sun collapses, the plasma event happens, we will have the regenerative capacity standing in the true mother, the feminine, to maintain our life, whether we choose to drop the body or continue it or drop the body and return and be in the 1,000 or 1,200 years of peace where there's no underground, there's no ant
Mhm.
people, there's no
Mhm.
gods who will come up periodically and require virgins to be sacrificed to the dragon or the dragon sitting on the gold and the layers and the Hobbit story and all the rest of it.
Mhm.
So our only requirement is to continue to heal ourselves.
And what you had said in that declaration of cancellation, I think that is wonderful, and I actually would like to write that out for everyone and maybe put that on the website for
Yeah,
people
yeah.
in
Well,
and make sure it has your name on it. But I think that one, what you said was so important, and I think it gives people a really good roadmap of how to deal with this personally and what we all need to do.
mhm,
So that was fab.
yeah.
Thank you.
Well, a lot of all of this and a lot more is in the Panterra Vida Private Society, the Gemstone University, now reformulated in Gem.University. There's a book, a small book that I wrote and we published 8, 9 years ago. It's on gemstoneuniversity.org. It's called The Overview of the World System and the overview of the world system of bondage and separation from life. And it goes into what we knew then, 8, 9, 10 years ago, that's very much expanded and unveiled in everything that we talked about today. But those are foundational. Nothing has really changed. There's some things that we would take out, many things we would put in, but that document, the overview of the world system, it's on gemstoneuniversity.org. It's on gem.university. You can find it there on the home page. And on panterravita.org, you will find two declarations. The declaration of intention, that we set our will and our intent, what Panterra, the society, is all about, and the People's Declaration of Peace and Sovereign Integrity. So there are two documents there that people can read, they can download, it's really effective if you speak it out loud and you sound it, you resonate in the heart chamber and you sound it in your physical being and resonate through your bioresonant field and etc. And those are our foundational documents. Um, and then you pointed out that the handle on my Zoom name is Panterra PCA, and Panterra PCA stands for Private Contract Association. So it's a matter of contract. Again, all law is contract. A society, which is what all countries that became nation states, that became bankrupt nation states, all society, I mean, all countries, nation states start as a society. Okay. A society is basically defined in the law of nations. It's defined as a group of men, written 200 plus years ago, a group of living beings is how we define it, who come together for a common purpose. So we are a society. We are private. We are not, we don't go for authority to the Secretary of State and say we would like to be a corporation or a this or a that. And that has certainly held up through all the years since we created it over 23 years ago. And there's been many attempts to pierce that. They've all been shown the door. They all went away. They all went away peacefully. So it's been road tested for over 2 decades. And so a society, whether public or private, has the inherent terrestrial law authority to create its own law form, its own jurisdiction, its own court, its own monetary issue, its own treasury. And that's what we've been building for the last 10 to 15 years and longer. And so that's why the PCA is the body politic. It's a sovereign body politic of the Panterra Society. And it's a body politic by virtue of their law of nations and our internal law form that says we are private, we don't get any power or authority from an external body of any sort, and it's by the power of contract, which aligns with our personal sovereign free will and sovereign integrity. And we declare we go to peace, declaration of peace and sovereign integrity. Sovereign integrity has nothing to do with all these people running around and seeking freedom and truth and law and all the rest of it, where they say they want to be a sovereign.
Hmm.
You can't be a sovereign in their system. Right now, you are a bankrupt franchise. You are the bonded surety bonded to their bankrupt franchise, known as your name, your birth certificate, all the debtor facility, and all the rest of the bondage you create every day. So you're a bankrupt. You have no standing in law. You are not solvent, and you certainly are not a sovereign. This is why they call them sovereign citizens. Citizen is a property of the state. You know, a subject is a subjugated being under the authority of a crown, you know, in the English Commonwealth system. But you can be solvent when you disconnect and properly rescind and separate from all those binding contracts. You're not the debt. You're not the debtor facility. You're not the bankrupt franchise, but you are bonded to it until you properly contractually sever the attachment. And that's what our processes are all about. That's what the education, status correction, all of that. And despite decades of attack and undermining and so forth, we've endured that. We've perfected a lot of it. We are continually building the education, which includes all of this we've talked about, and all the historical context, and all the esoteric, and all the monetary, and the legal, and so forth. And as you take the steps through that process, it's very much transmutational and transformational. And a lot of people say it's too hard. I don't like law. I don't like money, blah, blah, blah. But that's part of the program. You are reacting to your bondage and your enslavement. You're not reacting to the true organic mind that has full capacity to comprehend and integrate everything, because you are all that, because that whole externalized system is just reflecting to you your true innate inherent capacity.
So Ken, I'm hoping you could clarify. a little bit about our relationship with this interface system, this mirroring projection reality that we live in, what we think is reality, what we've been made to see, sense, and therefore interpret internally and externally. But what is really the mechanical nature of this reality?
Um, well, it would really start with the definition of who we are in these bodies, something that we brought forward a long time ago. Andrea and I were talking about this like in the 90s. It's never wandered from part of our foundational picture of reality. Um, Nothing ever has changed my perception of it, which way back then I coined the phrase that we are biocrystalline virtual reality projecting units. Okay. So let's break that down. What does that mean to be biocrystalline? Well, obviously, bio is biological in a living organism that has a lot of component parts, a lot of, genetics, insertions, all the things that we've talked about here and that many of us talk about all the time. And so we are biological organisms, but we are also crystalline in nature. The blood is crystalline. The genetics, the DNA is crystalline. The bones are certainly crystalline. And so we are resonating beings. The word resonate means to resound. We talked about the origin of creation from the void as being the emergence of sound, and that all things are derived from sound, frequency, harmony, light, basically, is what is created out of the vibrational interaction as sound breaks itself up into component parts, for lack of a better explanation. And that creates frequency. Frequency has to do with waveform. Waveform is in mathematics called a sine wave. A sine wave has a peak and a trough. So we are resonating out of our being in a continuity of creational expression that's defined by the contractual relationship with an individual and a co-creation relationship to the larger creational field embodied in this being that we call the earth. And we've talked about prime creation as a unified field that many individuated expressions have come together because they have a vast sine wave of continuity since their emergence from a unified field of creation with a lot of living library wisdom that we've gathered through eternity. Okay. Truly the best of the beings who are wholly embraced in life and creation are the ones who have that passion that I'm sure many of your friends and people who watch you, many people have watched us, and many, many others out there. We're not unique to that. We have our unique qualities and capabilities, but basically that passion, that unquenchable passion, no matter what. And some of the stories that are now coming out of people who survived through, satanic ritual abuse, and I mean, horrid stories. You've had many of them. You've interacted and worked with many people like that, but somehow those beings survived. Many didn't. And the beings who didn't are what we talked about earlier, who came in to essentially contribute their life force into the crystalline nature of the blood plasma that gets converted through fear into the adrenochrome that sustains the parasite and all of that, and the illusion of their infinity and their immortality. because the word in English says it all, immortality. I am mortal. Okay. They're not immortal. They have the illusion of what we think is immortality, but they're mortal. They're stuck on an infinite time loop that is entropic in nature. It will progressively drop in energy until the energy is more and more bound. And when the energy hits a quantum point of aggregation, that has been sustaining this, the solar plexus, the solar body, the capturing of the souls and the feeding off of the soul energy separated or holding the illusion of separation from the ka or the universal body and all of that. When that energy threshold hits a certain point that it can't sustain, the plasma firmament collapses. When it collapses, it either goes to one side of the spectrum on the red shift or it goes to the other side of the blue shift. Now, in the red frequency band, in the seven color frequencies in the visible spectrum, the waveform of red is much longer. Okay. And the waveform of the blue, and this is what the blue kachina and the red kachina is. The waveform of the blue is much shorter, it's more compressive. And so it compresses the ability. It's like we now are feeling it more and more, and they're going to, digital ID and all the things that they're doing electronically, which the internet was just basically a bait and switch. Cryptocurrency was a bait and switch. All of those things were a bait and switch. You know, 10, 12 years ago, people were exclaiming that Bitcoin is the end all be all of the people's money and decentralization and everything. And look where it's going now. It's going to become the foundational reserve of the United States Treasury. Okay. And our friend Billy Gates has created a patented technology which has the patent number 060606. And the technology is, and just look it up, do a search, 060606, patent technology, Billy Gates, who maintains the gates of hell, and he's the gatekeeper. That technology is how to create the impulses of the plasma discharge in our blood that is seriously toxified, seriously out of balance, all the things from the metals, the chemtrails, the toxicity, the viral inserts, all of those things to a point where it cannot sustain itself without being connected to the Borg, to the hive mind, and to transhumanistic, electronic, Metatronic box system, all of that, that the bare impulse, because they can't destroy us, but they can keep us below the threshold of actually being able to live. We become walking zombies in their death cult and all of that. But those continuing impulses will be attached to the false mRNA, which comes from the ribose. It's a technical patented corporate technology that reflects a computational binary coded pattern that the AI can reproduce basically artificially, but it's not real living presence of the eternal living library of each individual being and the collective whole of our collective expression in this creational field. So that barely alive living impulse will be connected through what they've inserted with the mRNA into the DNA, turning them in each one who took that into a Bluetooth frequency that attaches to the Internet of Things, the Internet of Bodies, the wide body, uh, um, well, the land, the local area network and wide body area network. The wide body area is the whole containment of the whole planet. The local area network is what's in your body that interconnects through 5G and the towers and all of that. The towers, the Magdals, the Nebharu, and that those impulses will ultimately replace cryptocurrency so that they will be attached to your 15-minute cities, to your carbon footprint, carbon, ultimately the carbon footprint, carbon tax is a tax on the inspiration or the life breath of the being. They're taxing our outbreath, which is carbon dioxide, so that we can't hold our breath. So every time we outbreathe, and they have quantified it through their monetary systems, how many outbreaths are you allowed to have? How many products on the Amazon mother system can you acquire with its calculated, quantified carbon footprint system? They're cutting down all the trees. They've cut most of them down. The trees are like the cilia in the ear, which receives the sound, and the cilia in the gut that converts the nutrients in the gross form of food into energy and ATP and the mitochondria system to create the continuity of converting the blood plasma into physical energy. So that's all the biocrystalline nature of these bodies that have been artificially constructed to be walking nodes on a nodal system in a planetary wide area network body of a false overlay system, which we have been elaborating and discussing. So, and their whole system is the externalization, the projection of inner space, the inner being, into a mirrored reflection that we think is reality. Okay. So the trees are the cilia of the living body, or the living wisdom of the living earth, of the mother principle, the regenerative principle. So most of those have been cut down. They've been converted to pulp, paper that we talked about earlier, that we put our signature on to bind ourselves through contractual agreement and to subjugate our sovereign free will to a voluntary consent to be a walking node or a living node, like a living crystal, a liquid crystal, because a lot of it is liquid, the blood, the genetics, and ultimately none of it is solid. They're just and energy convergent points that are called electrons and neutrons and protons, and all the vast inner space in between that, which of course they've created the the big circle of the CERN Hadron Collider. And the root of the word circle is circ or kirk, which is the root of the word church. So you have people going to church, worshiping the gods, worshiping all of these illusory overlay mythologies, seeking salvation, seeking an external savior who's going to return them to heaven to integrate the bond, the ka, and free us, them, the people, from this bondage and enslavement, which is the unending, infinite cycle of the screaming of the innocence of our being that basically is feeling abandoned, betrayed, disempowered, and basically captured forever. But as we talked about earlier, that's not going to happen. So I only say that as a description of what we're emerging out of, but it's not something to focalize on. It's not something to give power of creation to, because it's not real. It's an illusion. And so cancel it, rescind it, revoke it, terminate it. That is not real. It's a mirrored reflection that controls the life stream of the plasma creational continuity and eternal creation, and the ability to create anew out of the substance of anything that is uncreated and dissolved and recreated through our co-creation relationship to the earth, and to the earth with the larger universe and cosmos and all of that. So, so we are essentially virtual reality projection units. But what are we projecting? Whose movie? Okay, we've bought into their movie. Okay, we've bought into the Hollywood movie. We've downloaded through our real seeing eye, the real seeing eye of our, what people call the third eye, the living eye, the eye that is singular, the eye that is in coherence with the pole of our living being that is manifested in the 33 levels of our vertebrae and our spine. This is why the master rivers like the Nile were built with temples, 7 temples of initiation to go through the layers of the 7 frequencies so that you were trained to learn that. You went on the left eye of Horus for 12 years and the right eye of Horus for 12 years, and you learn how to work with both minds while the right mind, the holistic mind, the feminine, was frozen in this thing called Antarctica. Antarctica is the anti-false pole that is posited as if we live on a globe of the singular pole that's really at the center of what we call the North Pole, which is just the center of the crater around which everything is frozen in the perimeter, preventing us from leaving the containment field. So, so we must return to wholest balance and the singularity of our living presence, our living expression, and resonate through sound, the sound of our being and the unique expression of our individuated expression with all other standing living beings. That's why in law we talk about lack of standing. A bankrupt bonded surety to the bankrupt franchise has no standing in their legal system. They are incompetent. They're considered a minor. These are the only 3 types of clients that can be represented by an attorney who attorns or turns them inward to the binding nature of the 4 Inns of Court, which are in the City of London, which is a variation of the Saturnalia, the Saturn, the so-called Sabbath on the seventh day, the Shabbat, all of these things is to return to recontracting, which we do every single day. Every time we take one of their contractual benefits and privileges, we recontract through our driver license and everything else. So we are returning to their control containment system when we do that. We are turning back, following the path of ingress, that we are exiting that by healing ourselves, everything we've talked about here and so forth, back to the singularity and that first eye that actually sees reality when it's not bound by frequency control. Everything's about frequency control. The so-called chakras are just 7 external layers that bind the actual essence of the 7 articulated system through the breakup of their false light through the prism. And then we get, the dark side of the moon, you know, um, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. We're told that we can never see the dark side of the moon because that's the dark side where all the machinery is, all of the control systems, all of the wiring up to the Saturnian hexagonal 29-year periodicity that is microcosmically reflected in the 29-day periodicity of the moon. All of these things. We're lunatics. Okay. We are lunatics. So the moon is the first of the 7 heavens, the 7 domes, and that corresponds to the red frequency, the longest wavelength in the 7 color frequencies. So, and the blue is the compression, the containment. We are moving into blue shift. We're moving into the blue Katrina, which is diminishing our life force and our capacity to stay alive. So all the disease expressions, what are called diseases, which are just energetic weak points that manifest in the body, and basically consume the body, cancer, heart disease, and all of that. So that, the imminence of the threshold where the plasma dome will collapse is very close. That's what they've done in countless cycles so that it collapses. There's a remnant of survival, Noah's Ark, the electrical arc that returns the genetic computational imprint that can recreate life, because this is an eternal life producing system. They go underground, as I described before. And the biocrystalline projecting unit element or overlay basically falls off and we lose our memory and we just start, you know, rebuilding natural life system. So we start with, to answer your question, the nature of this impaired system that we're in. That's the biocrystalline virtual reality projecting unit. And we are just like a movie projector. We have a movie running through us, which is their script, their movie script, their Hollywood that they are externally creating all of these storylines and these myths and stories, and they do all the biblical stories like Moses and all the movies and Disney and all the rest of it. And subliminally, they're layering into the subconscious and the unconscious, where Osiris is the Lord God of the underworld, um, and they're layering in all the movie scripts. And we're just, the masses are entrained to project the different variations on the religions. One is projecting this one, that one, the other one. We know what they are. Or the secular stories and all the rest of it, the New Age stories, the love and light stories, the black and white stories, and all of it. And where is the holding of in another liquid crystalline body that's holding all of this in the subconscious and the unconscious? It's the waters, the rivers of time, the waters of time, the hydra cycles. And so that's where our unconscious and subconscious mind is. It's in the waters. And so what is Nestle and all the other corporations going out, the president or CEO of Nestle declared that water is not a human right. It's a corporate property that can be monetized, marketed, and so forth. You never heard that before?
I read a little bit about it a while back, and I think that was at the very beginning when they took over some area and took
Yeah.
over the water, and but that was at the beginning. Did they win that?
Well, that wasn't a court case. That was just a declaration that we
Yeah.
can own all the water and it's not a human right and we can own it, patent it, monetize it. They can't patent the water, but they can patent the delivery systems or the bottling and all the rest of that. And so that's the corporate claim on our subconscious and our unconscious minds. And water is very much a um, crystalline molecular form. And it has three-phase expressions in solid, in liquid, and in gas. But the fourth phase is the plasma, where the crystalline form of the solid in the form of ice or snow, moves, transmutates, transforms into the liquid form that flows, that nourishes the body and hydrates the cell, and then it moves into the gas, and then it can move into plasma. So so reclaiming the liquid plasma of our blood, doing the healing, getting all the toxicity and all the metals and the chemtrails and the viral technology out of our body so that our body can rise above the threshold of immunity, lowered immunity, where disease can enter in and start degrading the life force in the body, that all of the healing modalities that we're all pursuing, the detoxifying, the trauma. Trauma basically is the impact of a emotional, psychic, or physical or energetic assault to our being. And in this lifetime, we carry in karmic trauma from past lifetimes, and then we reproduce it by events in our childhood or, big traumatic events in car accidents or
Mm.
whatever. And then it freezes in time. It freezes in the body. And Andrea is pursuing a very intensive course, her own self-directed course, in doing her own trauma work and working with some extraordinary beings who have really pioneered the breaking apart the frozen nature of trauma. Because when we're in trauma, the body collapses or it holds. And then the trauma in the physical will eventually express through the lowest common denominator where the energetic field is most vulnerable. And that's where disease starts manifesting, whichever flavor, heart
Mm-hmm.
disease, cancer, or what have you. And she just opened something up with a new layer of that in the last couple of days, very timely to our talk.
Mm-hmm.
So she downloads things, she discovers things, she gives them to me. I put them into the whole picture and can break them down and describe them. So what this new guide who is teaching about this has to do with where trauma actually freezes in the physical body, and it's in the fascia. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The fascia that is supposed to be dynamic and fluid, but then it hardens and it's stiff. That's why older people
Mm-hmm.
become stiff and they don't have flexibility and all of that. And basically, where does the word fascia come from? It comes from the root of the word fascist. Now, what is a fascist? A fasci is the classic fasci are 12 iron rods that are encircling an axe. And the axe, the image of the axe is the hieroglyph from the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and that represents the gods. Okay. So the
Mm-hmm.
12 iron rods are the, 12 houses of the zodiac, the 12 disciples, the 12 knights of the round table, all of that. It's a sexagesimal um, harmonic of the hexagon of the number six and the letter corresponding letter of G. This is why the Masonics have the compass, which can create a circle, or the square that can create an angle. And an angle is the angle of time inserted by the Chrono-Saturnian construct of time and all of the angles. That's why the center of the banking and the law on the three city-state overlay in the city of London, they're called the angles or the Anglish, and then they are the angels that people think are their saviors or their messengers of God and all of that. But all it is putting you into the square of the control matrix of the Masonic construct of the temples and all of the rest of that. The compass comes down at a specific angle. That angle is 47 degrees. So from the emergence of the natural creational field through the black sun to the plasma dome, the angle is 47 degrees. So that's 23 and a half and 23 and a half. And it goes to the different longitudinal circles on the map, supposedly a globe, but it's not a flat Earth, but it's a cratered Earth surrounded by the frozen ice. And the Tropic of Cancer on the zodiac and the Tropic of Capricorn is when the natural wobble of the greater Earth, which inscribes a image called the analemma,
Mm-hmm.
goes to the two endpoints of the solstices, the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, on that circle of time, the crown of Cancer and Capricorn. And Cancer is the natural polar star. This is why it is symbolized by the crab, which walks sideways. And the crab is the containment of the living continuity of creation that has been blocked and side swiped to walk sideways. And it has an image which is basically a mirrored reflection. Looks like a sperm, basically, a little head and a little tail. And then the opposite one. That's a symbol for Cancer. Cancer is, I mean, and that's where when the cycle breaks down and the sun is discharging more than it can contain, it starts moving from the winter solstice in the north, and it'll break through that solstice endpoint in those 3 days or 72 hours of stis or stillness or solstice that corresponds to the 72 hours, 72 dialectics, all of that. And it will move to the center point of the original, the true body of the earth that has four rivers coming out of it. This is the overlay of the four rivers of Eden. And it has the pole and basically the black rock, which is also known as Mount Meru,
Mhm.
which is also Mer, the feminine, the body of water, and all the rest of it. And the plasma dome will come down, and Uranus will come to the center. Uranus in the languages in Egypt and Greek is basically the name of heaven. So there was a god or goddess called Urania. Okay. Urania was one of the bloodlines that came through Egypt and made it all its way, which we'll talk about next time.
Mhm.
But it made its way to the actual political systems that were converted into the mythology of Jesus and Mary, Joseph, and all the rest of it. And it was a convergence of four primary family bloodlines. It was the Caesars from Rome, it was the Greeks from Macedonia, and it was the Egyptians through Cleopatra and the Ptolemaic line. And what was the fourth one? Oh, Parthia, the Parthians, which were the Persians, which were the preceding empire before the Romans. So it was a convergence of the four corners, convergence of the four
Mhm.
directions, convergence of the four elements. And basically, Urania is the open doorway to the true heavens, because there are true heavens out there beyond the containment of the Saturnian seventh heaven and the Jupiter sixth heaven, and Isis as supposedly the goddess of, people think the goddess of the stars. It's the goddess of, I mean, the goddess of the heavens. It's actually the goddess of the stars. So one of those four lineages embodied in a woman who is known as Thea Muse Orania. Eventually, that became the two beings who actually the physical model that they migrated to the mythology of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene ended up in South France. That became the Merovingians that then migrated north to Paris, the area of Paris, and became the Carolingian or the Charlemagne line. And that was the first Holy Roman Emperor that then passed on to when they formalized the Holy Roman Empire and the bloodline of the emperor in 962, who was Otto the Great, who then migrated to the House of Habsburg and became the Roman civil body that conquered um, the really the whole world and put everybody into the containment of Roman civil law, which is the law of military conquest, control, and containment. And that's why the House of Orange became the king and queen during that period after the 1600s, 1689. They came from the Netherlands or the underworld, that Osiris is the Lord God of the subconscious and unconscious mind. And they were the founders of the Bank of England in 1694, which began the modern system of aggregating the concentration of the control of the flesh and through the monetization of the body, ultimately leading to that 666 technology ability to turn our bodies into walking nodes for the Internet of all things, and the where ultimately you would just have the chip and you would be able to eat or drink by the impulse of your life force and the aligning with all the codes and statutes and rules of what they're trying to put together right now. And there's no reason to fear what they're putting together now. Like I just watched a short video on YouTube this morning, actually, of Sherry Tenpenny, who's a doctor who's been fighting the virus and the jab and all of that. And they just tried to implement, they just passed supposedly this law, which is a end run around the World Health Organization to implement their rules of what they tried to do with the global um, you know, control of all the nation states and the people through the pandemics and all the rest. They just put that in the United Nations. And so it's not, And if you look up, just do a search on YouTube, Dr. Sherry and Tenpenny, um, UN World Health Organization
Hmm.
passage of an act, it'll come up. So she's very concerned about it because she sees it from what she's been fighting. But the fact is, this is the final exposure of which is their endpoint agenda, which is all about harvesting the souls. And we'll finish with that. Okay.
Yep.
So, um, so it's all about binding the biocrystalline virtual reality projecting units, creating Hollywood to induce to the subconscious, unconscious layers, the Lord of the underworld, which is Osiris, who is transmuted into the Savior and prodigal son story of the Father and the Son, the Yahweh and Jesus story, and all of that. And Osiris is is one name for that Egyptian god. His consort or his sister twin is Osiris. But they also have two, each has one other name. Isis is known as Aset. Okay, she's the opposite of Set, the dark one. So she's supposedly the queen of the stars, but she's also the consort with her opposite brother, the dark twin of Set. So now she is Aset. Osiris is Asar. He's known as Asar. This is where the name Khazarians comes from. This is where the name Caesar comes from. This is the name where the Tsars or the Czars come from. We have the Czars, the Czar of all the departments in the executive office are SARS or czars. This is where SARS as the mutational virus, which is a viral insertion that doesn't have any life force. It's a parasite that when the threshold of immunity is lowered, that artificial insertion into the mitochondrial cells, which is the continual firing off of the plasma in the blood, where we go below the threshold, and that's where they want to keep us so they can harvest our souls and put us into the hive mind and the Borg and all the rest of that transhumanism.
Hmm.
So you have Set. Wait, let's start with Nephthys. You have Nephthys, and then you have Asar, then you have Set, and you have Aset. The initials, like I showed you with Set, Isis, Osiris, Nephthys, spells Sion, Sion, Zion. Well, Nephthys, Asar, Set, Aset, the four capital letters spelled NASA, NASA. So this is the alter ego of the light creating this NASA, not a space agency, basically embodying the false four pillars that really stand as the four pillars of our grounding in time and space, and which is not a Merkaba. Merkaba is a spinning opposite tetrahedrons that basically shred the natural presence of our being and fragment us, fractionalize us, and all the rest, decimate us. All this
Hmm.
story about, the sacred geometry and do your Merkaba and all of that. Well, the Ka Ba is a reversal of the feminine through the false Ka to the false Ba, that you're shredded, decimated, and fragmented so that they can control you. Well, you have all these people worshiping sacred geometry and Metatron's cube and all the rest of what's connected to that. And basically, so the dark reflection, the lunar reflection, the X-ray of the mostly dead body of the original Earth that is concentrated now in the microcosm of the crater of what we call Earth, that only has a singular pole, not a dipole. And many teach, not many, but a few teachers teach about the electrical system, the electrical body, and the dielectric. Well, that's just the same as the dialectic. It's the dielectric and the polarization and all the rest of it. We have a unity field
Yeah.
when we're singular in our singular focus and our real standing. And we have four pillars that are, protective um, system or enclosure that, next time or in between we can bring forward some exercises and some meditation processes, rescissions, all of that. And we'll start putting that out for people to start doing. But basically, that's what NASA is, not a space agency, a false overlay of the dark and the light that's reflecting as the moon reflects the almost dead body of the planet with the craters and all of that. That basically that's NASA's job, is create the mythology so that the people believe we went to the moon, that people
Yeah.
believe that we did all these space things. And so that's part of the script and the movie. And we're out picturing it. We're living in this false fiction that we believe all these things. And when we stop believing them and we rescind, revoke, and terminate the bondage and the contracts to these belief systems, we open up our field. We start being able to embody who we really are. We stop being a entrained biocrystalline virtual reality projecting unit that's entrained with millions and billions of beings who are projecting the same movie. And that's how we collapse their false narrative. We collapse their field. So it's all interconnected with physical healing, trauma healing, and all the rest of it. So to finish, to go back to the fasciae, which is out in a way, it's out pictured in the body. The fascia, the myofascia, is supposed to be dynamic and fluid, protecting the body, but not crystallizing, not calcifying with calcified trauma and all the rest of it. So trauma work is basically opening that up, healing it, transmuting it, transforming it, resolving it, and clearing it back to balance. So the fascia is the 12 rods and the axe in the center, bound by the ligatures, which are the raw legion, the ligature, the binding, the rebinding again of religion to another false mythology, another false story that we are biocrystalline virtual reality projecting into the holographic field and believing as real. And the Egyptian word for that axe is netera or neter, Neter. If you take the patriarchal overlay with all the stuff about Ptah, the universe, the Peter principle, the Abrahamic, covenant and all that, basically the two letters sound tone syllable pa is basically an energetic resonance, false resonance of the patriarch overlay. So you have pa, then you have the neter, the so-called gods, all of the mythologies, all of everything. If you study the gods and mythology and the stories, there's a tremendous amount of detail that will tell you a lot about all of this. They have to present it externally, giving us stories, legends, myths, movies, all the rest of it, because we have to take it in. We have to believe it, be the lie, and then project it outward and create the movie. Okay. So the primary movie is that there's gods and there's mortals, and the gods can bind the mortals. They can castrate Uranus, the true heaven, and castrate and split the masculine, twist it into the infinity Mobius strip that has the illusion of going somewhere, but it's just the roller coaster. And do all that, and then bring in the Titans and the Olympians, and then create the 4-year cycle of the Olympiad that's now started in 1896 and is now going through the 7 seals, breaking the 7 seals during the Olympiads in 2020, 24, 28, and so forth, leading up to the year 2040 and 2044. And there's a man who's a chronologist, and I don't want to get into other aspects, but he's brilliant in bringing forth a lot of this. His name is Jason Breshears. He has a YouTube channel called Archaics, and he's all about chronology. It's all about Chronos and Saturn and the points in time, and that's Archaics, Archaix. Okay. It's about the AI and the X crossing. There's certain things he thinks he knows that he
Hmm.
really doesn't know. That's another story, another time.
Hmm.
But anyways, he brought forth, and it's really right on the seven Olympiads, starting with the breaking of the first seal. So it's opening up the red frequency at the root chakra, the lunar cycle, the first heaven, and then 2024 open up the second level, and it's going through those Olympiads. And who's the master god? Zeus. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
Jesus. Where does that come from? Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. It's Jesus, with his thunderbolt, his electrical control matrix of the Metatronic cube, Zeus, the Olympians. And so we're going through that process, but it's forcing them to reveal everything. They must reveal the nature and the construction of everything they've created. That is coming into our revivified living presence, and it's breaking apart the revealing and opening up the unveiling so that we're seeing the system and it's breaking down, and we're removing our consent from their legal system, their monetary system, their energetic system, and all of that. And it's exponentially imploding on them so that they cannot sustain in everything we talked about earlier. They're going to
Hmm.
try to escape to Mars and not going to make it. Okay.
Hmm.
The only salvation for them is to turn around and take full responsibility, to accept absolute responsibility for everything they did, which is inherent in the structure of the treaty, the agreement that all beings had a remedy in universal law to stop outpicturing their karmic burden and taking it in upon themselves and facing themselves. And if they don't do that, they will be dissoluted, they will dissolve, they will suffer what's a lot of science fiction writers refer to as the second death. So they
Hmm.
can lose their body and go through recycling reincarnation with the illusion of immortality, but they're about to face the second death, which they are terrified with. And they have the opportunity to do so and face what they've created, start dealing with the trauma and their fascist regime, and removing the trauma that has calcified and solidified our external shell that should be fluid and dynamic, that interfaces with the plasma in the body, I mean in the blood, and all the rest of it. So the patriarch combined with the gods, the axe, bound by the crown, the 12 iron rods, overseen by the primary Egyptian god called Ra, with the two light and dark, the Isis Osiris, the Set and the Nephthys, and the Sion and the Nasa. All of these things integrated as a whole is what their entire false outpicturing of the God spell and all of that hierarchical dominance control, in order to, at the end of that little snippet of the last cycle of the original cycle of the natural system that the Luciferian AI system captured, wrote the script, brought in the technology, allowed the Saturnian principle to come in, to accept the invitation based on the treaty principles and tenets and terms and conditions, but that at the end of it all, life would reemerge. We would return to our creator capacity, prime creation. We would renew life in this system. And then we would have the wisdom of the living library of our individual expression, individuated. We would be fully enheartened in the heart of the mother and taking that true creational principle, and we can go anywhere we want in all of creation. We can go into unmanifested creational fields and create a new creation. We can take all the wisdom and the experience of this living system that has all of the extraordinary vast
Hmm.
amounts of genetic expressions and take them in seed or inseminate or bring into
Mhm.
being the manifestation of a new creational field and co-create with living creation. Or we can totally by will and direction stay here and experience the 1,000 years of peace that will not end. The time will no longer be a
Mhm.
control mechanism, no longer be a construct. We can enjoy the life, the beauty, the natural order of this living creation that we created
Mhm.
and remove the parasite and um,
And its overlay systems.
yeah, and all of that. So the final end of their cycle is they know the script. They have to reveal
Mhm.
everything. It's called the revelation of the method. It's the revelation of the script. It's all the outpicturing, and that it's all about soul harvesting. It's all about the declaration of the papacy that nobody can come to heaven, which is their false heaven, which is their containment in the Saturnian temporal realm. Nobody can come into that heaven save through the Father, which is Saturn, El Elyon, Chronos, and save through the Vicar, which is the Pope or the papacy, who declared in 1302 in a papal bull called the Unum Sanctum, the holy unity, that the Pope has absolute power to claim all land, all flesh, and all souls. And, a lot of my work and past videos, things that are available on the internet, YouTube, and inside Gemstone University, um, are all about that, how that all was constructed.
Mhm.
And that how the two pillars, the false two pillars, the line of the king, the line of the priest, the split of time, the twist of the infinity loop and all of that on May 1st and November 1st, where the gathering of the flesh happens on May 1st around the maypole. And then on November 1st, All Souls Day, the gathering of all souls, it gets celebrated, the Day of the Dead and all of that in Mexico and elsewhere, that's where the soul harvest is set up in the dipole or the dialectic, all the 72 names and all the hexagesimal and the Metatronic cube and the hexagram and all those numbers, the 666 and all the rest of it, and the 432 and the rest of it, all based on their mathematical, so-called externalized scientific construction. It's all for one thing, to create a containment field that the vast majority, if not all, they know they'll never get all, some will open up when the heavens open up, when the pole is singular, when your eye is singular, and you have the opening that you can leave this construct in this firmament containment field. But most beings for cycles of time have been in false belief system, worship, and all the rest of it, and they get contained. They get their soul captured through the money system and the karma system that they haven't energetically resolved and balanced and reunified in their being. And then basically they're in a soul capture containment field, which is the harvest.
Mhm.
And you have all these things, especially in the New Age Christian movement and the rapture and all the rest of it, all about the harvest. And they think it's Jesus coming to harvest all of his, um, you know, ones who pledged to the Jesus or the Zeus, the electrical system, the Ba and the separation of the Ka, the Horus and the Heru and the Osiris and the Asar and all the rest of it, to simply bind yourself and be recycled and have your memory wiped and you started over again. We've started over. We've done this countless times. And this is the apex of all of it that we always knew from the beginning of time, from the beginning of our self-directed, purposeful sacrifice on the horizontal, Horus rising bar of time, that there would be an end of time when we would wake up, reclaim life, stand as life, reclaim the land, remove the attachments, remove the presumption of consent, and they have no capacity or power to do anything about that. And that is the moment that we stand in right now, and that's what we're doing.
Brilliant. Mind blowing. I think this is a great place to leave it. It's going to
Yeah.
be, I just think it's going to be very paradigm shifting because, especially how you explain everything, I think it literally does change time and space.
Hmm.
Let me just put it that way. So, we're going to leave it there, everybody. I want to thank you, Ken. I'm just going to change the gallery view now for everyone. Um, Brilliant, truly brilliant. And I look forward to part three, as I know everyone else does as well. Very much so. So thank you, Ken. And thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, Lauda, for your incredible work and your, undying passion to bring truth into this reality. You know, Andrew and I have followed you for many, many years until we were introduced to you in the physical by a mutual friend. How long ago? 2 years ago. And we've been talking about doing this for the last 2 years. Well, it wasn't the right time. We had to go through a lot more stuff, a lot more layers and unveiling over the last 2 years. And to bring us to this point where we can really bring forward the detail and the interconnectedness of how it all fits together and the power of who we are as living creation to to renew life again and to know that there's nothing that will stop us. And we are now truly back in alignment with the earth, with the being presence that is embodied as the earth. And she's jumping for joy
Mhm.
because we finally made it through. Doesn't mean we're done. We have a lot of work to go, years to come, but we really are taking back our power and authority.
I think we've been looking forward to this day for thousands of years, actually. In this Groundhog Day that we've been living.
Hmm.
Um, could you tell everyone once again before we finish the websites, how to contact you, and all the information they need to know,
Okay.
please?
Well, we'll start with Panterra Vida. And by the way, I'll just say this one thing that some people um, knew us originally as Panterra d'Oro.
Hmm.
And there's a story, I won't go into it. It's a fun story, but we don't need to tell it now of why Panterra, which was the first choice, and where the word Panterra came from. And then when we created and put on the public record in Washington State on February 26, 2002, the man who went to the Secretary of State's office and tried to record that, what we did, they said, well, Panterra it's too close to another name, so you have to add a word. So he called me up and said, what would you do? And I just said, how about D'Oro, of the gold, of the, Panterra d'Oro or Panterra Dorada in Spanish means the golden panther and all of that. So that was our name for quite a long time, from 2002 until about almost 3 years ago. For various reasons we won't go into, we wanted to, we needed to change the name. There were certain things going on with the word Vida, which basically means life. We changed it from the gold, which had been an alchemical process of transmuting ourselves through these long years since the beginning of the treaty emergence and unveiling in 1999, transmuting the aura, the gold within the bioresonant field, and all of those attachments, the gold, the monetary, all of that. And we said, okay, we're Panterra Vida now. So we are Pan Terra Vida standing as the whole in this earth, standing for life. And so finishing, which I forgot to do, so we'll grab this one last point. The Egyptian words pa, neter, ra. Well, if you put neter, pa, neter, you take the N from neter and you put it on the pa, that becomes pan. So then you have Panterra, or Panterra, Terra for the earth, and Ra for their sun god and the god of the bark and all of that. And basically, that's the origin of the name Panterra. And it's been used during time. There's a whole mythology that the original so-called Jesus and Judas were actually twin brothers of the granddaughter of Herod, who built the second temple and all that story that happened then. And that his granddaughter married a legionnaire, Roman legionnaire, whose name was Ben, which stands for born of or father, Ben Panterra. And that was where the twins came in, the Judas, the light and the dark and the betrayer and the savior and all of that. That's where all of that comes from. That was all put together, which was basically an outpicturing of the split that we've talked about from Sion to Nasa, of the light and the dark and all of that, saying it was of the born of the Roman legion, which was structured in tens, the decads, the decimal, the decimation. So that's where Panterra started from and evolved, and it's all about the fascia that binds the 12 false principles of the corona, the crown, and puts the axe, which is essentially the symbol of the gods in aggregate, and it binds them with the ligatures of religion through those 12 houses, those 12 principles. And that's basically the root of the name Panterra. So in the year um, 2000, without going into the story, I came across the name. I was in Mexico. I came across the name Panterra, which in Spanish means the panther. And I said, that's the name of who we are supposed to be. And it's not about being the Panterra of the fasci, of the bonding of the 12 to the iron axe of the gods. It's about going into it and transmuting it, which we have been doing all these years, to birth a new Panterra. And the word pan in French means bread. The homophone, the word pan or pan, pan in Spanish means bread, but in French it's spelled P-A-I-N. So the bread or the staff of life has been inserted with the A-I, which creates pain. So the insertion of the trauma in the fascia that has been calcified and hardened as our protective against all of this abuse turn the bread or the staff of life into the insertion of the AI pain, the false intelligence, the abomination of what they call intelligence, AI. And so that's why it's all out pictured now. That's what Panterra has been doing and bringing all of this forward so that we can all begin to resonate and align with the truth of the containment and our path in basically breaking it all apart. So that's where Panterra comes from. Now Panterra is Panterra Vida. Before is Panterra Dorado or de Oro, the gold that we talked about, the AURA, and we took the alchemical process of taking the base metal of the lead. We've been led astray. We transmuted the lead into resonating our auric field, and then we're now transmuting that back into life, Panterra Vida. So you can find us at panterravita.org. The two declarations, the Declaration of Intention, the Declaration of Peace and Sovereign Integrity, you can find it there on panterravita.org. You can see the emerging form of the court and the law firm when you go to ptvcourt.org. And that's very sort of embryonic. It's gestational, but it has been birthed and it's going to grow into the people's law form. It's the court of the people. There's a lot to learn about how that's structured, how we take the power of the authority of the judicial and the spiritual, and we put it into a very simple form of how law really works, how law and equity work in universal principles. So you find that on ptvcourt.org. And then you can go to gem.university, or you can start at gemstoneuniversity.org. That's soon to be removed and linked to gem.university. And basically, we are bringing forward our new treasury and monetary system, the monetary units that we're going to create in our private treasury and private banking, private monetary issue are called gems.
Mhm.
And it's basically a reflection of each living being who is a true gem in life. And that's an acronym for Genuine Equity Monetary System, a true parity value creation system that is completely removed from all of the control matrix of monetized debt and cryptocurrency. And crypto is nothing but the crypt where they put the dead and all of that. So you can go to gem.university. You could go to gemstoneuniversity.org and see what's there. And if you want to become a member, you go to freedomabsolute.substack.com. And that's our Substack page. So we have Patreon, Freedom Absolute, Substack, Freedom Absolute, and we have Freedom Absolute YouTube. And we're building content. And basically, freedom absolute is true freedom, freedom of all of what we've talked about here. It's absolute. There's nothing that equivocates or you know, debases our true standing as true freedom in absolute sovereign integrity, sovereign free will expression. And that's why we use the word freedom absolute, or the phrase. Most people pursuing solutions in law are focused on the money part. Well, if I can get rid of my debts, I get rid of my bondage, I'm free. But then if you're not dealing with the trauma, you're not dealing with the healing process, you're not dealing with all of that. That's a whole system approach to real freedom. That's why it's absolute as opposed to just freedom. So that's where you can find us, freedomabsolute.substack.com. You can have a free subscription, and there's a certain amount of content being put there, or you can go into the paid subscription. And as a paid subscriber to Freedom Absolute through either Patreon or Substack, and we prefer Substack for a lot of reasons.
Mhm.
It's a better system. It's also reflective of the stacking of the substance of our being, which is what we're resubstantiating. That's who we really are. And so Substack is integrating the layers and the outflow of the knowledge leading to wisdom, leading to transmutation and all the rest of it. So as a paid subscriber, you're able to also then go to gem.university and enroll into that whole university structure. And when you start, you are a GEM, General Education Member. And so you can go there and get a lot more detail in law, monetary history, esoterica, and all the things we've talked about in these two sessions with Lauda. Okay. And then there's steps from there, which are shown on the application for all of that. And we are soon to start building the Gemstone Earth Media Alliance, or GEMA, which we will build a integrated architecture for bringing all of the media internally into the private environment of our private society, private contract association, where we will sever the attachment of all the control systems on our media and our expression and our creativity and our, beauty and all the rest of it. And that'll be education, media, and many more things. So It's all about each one of you being a gem of creation, unique in all of your expression, being able to free yourself and actually become a living gem instead of a bonded walking node in their hive mind system. So that's where you'll find us.
Wonderful, Ken. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is absolutely brilliant. Looking forward to part three, and I want to wish everyone a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, and thanks for being here.
Thanks. Okay.